in the morning. You got me up, all cause you need to talk. To 4 in the evening. Wanna break up, say that you've had enough. I'm tired of talking, again and again. Argue about everything. You are my darling. This kiss and make up, I know you wanna touch. You call me every night, call me every day. I just wanna get you alone now. Trust me when I say, we gon' be okay. We just gotta boom, bada boom, ba. I don't wanna fight, you know that I'm right. Baby, let me talk to your body. We gon' be okay, hear me when I say.
Shame me about going to Thailand. You can't shame me about going to Africa,
right?
Or Portugal or Morocco.
Right.
Them days are over. They're over.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of black women don't believe the fat meat is greasy. Right. But I'll tell you what, if I've had that, you'll find out for sure. Yes, I am from North Carolina. I am country. And I embrace all that. So,
I'm gonna use that. Damn, the fat meat is greasy, but you know what? It goes back. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised.
I saw her question when it came up. I just want to emphasize that it does not look like these fly-by-night ladies that are out here teaching femininity. You can't teach femininity. Someone can hide it and pretend to be feminine for 90 days and then 180 days. Marlon, you know this. You know, we learned this in school. A person is going to show their true nature in about 90 days. 180 days, I call it full-blown person. It's right. Inevitable for you not to see the real person at that point. So you have these relationship feminine coaches out here that are fake feminine, teaching these women these things, and half the time they're not married. These women haven't been dating in 4 or 5 years. They have fake engagements. They're never married. So, I mean, this is bad information. You have got to learn to be feminine.
Should marriage equal more, or should marriage be less? There's a large percentage of men that are in sexless relationships. Many men, when they give the commitment to a woman, expect sex to be some part of the relationship as a man gives his resources, his time, and his protection. But many men are suffering with mental abuse and mental anguish because the woman that they are with have decided to become sexless in the marriage or the relationship for whatever reason and use sex as a weapon to control the man. Because of this epidemic, because of this issue, many men are suffering in silence because they're not getting their needs met and their needs wanted. Many men have lived based on the image, based on my dear friend Dr.THasan Johnson, on the image of marriage, but that image of marriage have left a schema affliction in their mind. Schema meaning they have a fixated mindset, thinking that marriage will give them the outcomes that they wanted, but because of that, and because of them not getting the outcomes that they wanted, it's left them with an affliction, which is a pain. And because of this pain, many men are opting to either stay in these toxic relationships, or they're more or less decided to get divorces and deal with the financial repercussions. As we begin to start this show, I want to thank some of my Cash App crusaders. I want to thank my man Anthony Rector. I want to thank John Mitchell. I want to thank J.S. Huggins. I want to thank my man Deacon Eric Spencer. And I want to thank the all-time automatic Mr. Melody. You always come through for me, brother. And for that, I'm forever grateful. But back to the topic. Because many men are suffering in silence, it appears that a lot of men have been smeagled into relationships. And it's a new term that I created called the smeagling of relationship, because a lot of men go into relationships with a blue pill ideology, but a lot of women go into relationships with a red pill ideology because they want the ring, because they know that the ring symbolizes power. As you and I know, Dr. Dre just went through a divorce where he lost several and thousands of millions of dollars. And because of that, many men are asking themselves the question, is it worth it being smeagled in a relationship, or should a man just stay single, focus on himself, or get a marriage or relationship outside the confines of the United States? You know, Teddy Pendergrass said it better than I said, and I've always used Teddy Pendergrass as a quote. Teddy said, it's so good to love somebody and somebody to love you back. But because of the current trends in America, many men are asking themselves the question, why should I get married when I can be sexless, frustrated, depressed, and destroyed by the course? We're going to have the venerable Dr.THasan Johnson, as he talked about in one of his prior shows, the Onyx Report, about the image of marriage and how the image of marriage has been imprinted in the minds of men. And that imprint, when men really get to the reality of marriage, are having to deal with a schema affliction. And also, we're going to have my man, Dr.Thunder, who is a theologian and also a professor in music, I believe, and myself, the Kosher Clinician, as we explore all the dynamics that are more or less associated in relationships. Listen to this. Many men and women, especially men as it relates to marriage, do not believe that the fat meat is greasy. The fat meat is greasy is a term my man E. Spence and I decided to coin to more or less symbolize or commemorate the cognitive distortions that a lot of women are having and a lot of men are having as it relates to the importance of relationships. So I want you guys to enjoy this show as we talk about sexless marriages. And also I want you guys to enjoy this show as we talk about the smeagling of relationships as it relates to the Lord of the Rings. As Smeagol was a goat that had a lust for power that was related to Solipsism. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this show as I bring it to you live from the greatest state in the union, the Tar Heel State. And I want you guys to remember this. If it ain't seven, it ain't kosher. If it ain't kosher, it ain't right. I want you to ask yourself the question, is marriage a commodity in this current time that we live in? And why are men suffering in silence in sexless relationships? And will you be smeagled into a marriage where the outcomes are often deleterious? Enjoy.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you. I
Great.
can hear you now.
Well, how you guys doing? This show is going to be a power fast show. You guys hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you. I can hear you now.
I hear
How you
some
guys doing? There's an echo in the back. All right. All right. There's an echo. There's an echo. I don't know who it is. All right. Hold tight. Hold tight. Echo. Give me 1 minute. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you. I just hear it too.
I don't know where the
It's possible that one of you have in the browser have the YouTube open.
Yeah, I don't have anything open. Hold tight.
Or if you're playing something, playing something and it's feeding back into your mic.
Okay. Is it better now?
No.
Okay. All right.
If you're playing something out loud, your mic. In your mic.
Yes, Evan, I think it's on your end.
If you're playing something out loud, he's muted and it's still going.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Echoes?
Yeah.
Echoes going.
All right, perfect. So once again, this is a segue to the show that I did with Dr. Thunder talking about the impact. Yeah.
Okay. Back.
So once again,
Okay.
this is a segue. I don't know who that is. All right, guys.
It sounds like someone has YouTube open because it takes a few seconds.
If you mute each of us, you might be able to tell who's it's coming from if it's not you.
Okay. Are we still? I think it's gone away. I think it's gone away.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. So once again, Dr. Thunder and Dr. THasan Johnson and my man Eric Spencer with BMO. It's a pleasure to have you guys on the show. Once again, this is a segue from the show that Dr. Thunder and I did talking about the importance of therapy in the Black community, but also Dr. Johnson talking about what you've talked about in the past is the imprint or the image of Black relationships, and also a term that I coined called the smeagling of American relationships. And I call it that because if you look at it through the lens of the esoteric, Smeagol was a golem, and his main quest was more or less power. It had nothing to do with the kingdoms of men, but it was more or less power. So I created a term called the smeagling of relationships. And the question remains, are American men the true lords of the ring once they get married? So I want you guys to introduce yourself, starting with Dr. Thunder, and then Dr. Johnson, and then Eric, you come in and explain who you are and how you're going to contribute to the show.
I'm Dr. Thunder, and a musician, professor, and social commentator. I just interviewed the Kosher Clinician on my live stream program called Thunder's Thoughts, which is on Wednesdays at 4:15 Eastern Standard Time. And I have an interview series called Conversations with Dr. Thunder, and I interviewed Dr. THasan Johnson on that program. That was a really good interview. And I've been around the manosphere for pretty much since the pandemic started. But I had sort of been checking some things out, and my journey kind of led me through Solo TV 84, Solomon Jones, through him to pretty much all of the content creators that I've collaborated with. I saw Dr. THasan Johnson get interviewed on Kevin Samuel's program, and so that led me to reach out to him, and the lead attorney connected the Kosher Clinician, myself, and so anyhow, I think that the conversations that are happening in this space are the most important conversations that are happening right now, because if we can't get this relationship thing between Black men and Black women worked out, if we can't figure out how to do something to improve what's going on, then we're just going to stop reproducing. So anyhow.
So Dr. Johnson, and from your best estimation based on clinical research or practical research, what's wrong with Black relationships in America as it relates to the images of the past? I'm sorry.
Well, first I was going to say, don't let Dr. Thunder not tell your audience about his live performances. I got a chance to see him perform, and the brother's tight. So we didn't talk about that before we get off. No, I did a show on my YouTube show, The Onyx Report, Wednesday night. We did a show about whether or not Black men need to let go of the Black love velvet painting.
Yes.
And the reason I did that show is because I come out of the conscious community, right? And for many of us, especially since the 1970s, we remember the Black velvet paintings of Black love, and usually you had a man and a woman with an afro and some kind of embrace. And then, of course, you had the beads in the doorway and the Jet magazine on the table and that whole kind of thing. But I also grew up in a generation of Black men who were going into the academy in Africana studies and Black studies, Pan-African studies, African-American studies. And many of us were trying to embody a lot of those nationalist ideas in our lives, in our private lives. And we tried different types of relationships and whatnot. We can go into more depth about that later. But the core of it was that, I argue that many of us were trying to live in a painting. And the problem with that is it often handicaps you from dealing with the actual person standing in front of you. You know what I mean? Because you're living in a fantasy that often she doesn't share. And this is why when you start talking about the impact of the family court, when you start talking about the impact of no fault divorce in the 70s, we can go down the list of policy influences that damage the Black family structure. You are wholly unprepared for what is often used against you in regard to these policies and in regard to these institutions, because you're living in an idea that not many people share, I would argue. So, right. So in terms of the state of Black love, the state of the Black family, I think that's the starting point in a lot of the work I do is the impact of policy and echoes. Not only the impact of policy, but the impact of policy on behavior over decades. So when you talk about the removal of the Black father, this is a product of policy, right? When you started to see Black men we started to step back from marriage in 1965, and it's only continued and only gotten worse since then in response to policy. So with the absence of the father, you have young men who don't know what it means to be a man, a father, or a husband. And then you have the same with daughters, but with a central family led by Black women, you have this kind of notion of a strong Black female without any idea of what exactly a day-to-day marriage looks like. How do you disagree with your spouse? How do you have a disagreement? How do you show love? How do you, how do you even base things like having sex, and to what extent the kids may hear something? These are day-to-day realities in other cultures that in much of Black America since the 1970s really hasn't had a coherent structure on. So that being said, and like I said, we can talk about this more in depth as we go. These are the issues that hamper Black relationships and Black love.
Well, I don't know if you guys saw art. It was William Smeagled, and when you look at it through the lens of the esoteric, Dr. Johnson, tell me what you saw from that thumbnail. And I'm going to break it down in a minute, but tell me what you saw through your critical lens of knowledge. You're a Libra like Dr. Thunder, but tell me what you saw, brother, based on that thumbnail, and tell me how you think it's relevant to the topic.
Well, I just saw it. I only saw it a little bit of it, but if I understood you, you were asking the question as far as this question of Lord of the Rings, whether or not the ring in and of itself has had an impact. But I only had a chance to glance at it once, so I'm afraid.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. You guys hold tight. I'm gonna bring you back on. Hold tight, guys. Hold tight. Okay, I can't find it. All right, hold on. I'm gonna bring you guys back on. And what is the symbolism in your best estimation, guys, that you see? Dr. Thunder, what do you see? We talked about it briefly on your show. Are American men Smeagled into relationships, and are men actually the lords of the rings? Because in my mind, the rings symbolize power that's bestowed to a woman that's committed to serve him in the context of a relationship. But many times after listening to what Dr. Johnson was saying, and a lot of men are saying they were in sexless relationships because they thought the ring gave them power, but the ring actually gave them pain. So from your estimation, Dr. Thunder, tell me what you saw based on that thumbnail, because in my mind, it was very profound.
Okay, so if the analogy holds, because Smeagol is he's stricken with the ring, all he wants to do is he's chasing the ring, and by chasing the ring, he's chasing sort of this idea of power and how the ring makes him feel, and maybe in the same kind of way women are chasing the ring. It's like this thing where they want a wedding, but they don't really want marriage. Kind of a thing where there's a lot of responsibilities and you're making a deal, there's a commitment, when you feel like doing this, when you don't feel like doing that, there's something that you're getting and something that you're giving in return for that. But what it seems like is happening now is many women will say whatever necessary, whatever they need to say, and act in whatever way they need to act to get the ring. Once they get the ring and they have the commitment, then that's when all of that extra behavior stops.
Right.
And I can tell you, having experienced this firsthand, and unfortunately, I think probably, well, if not most, you know, a lot of black men have you know, at some point in their you know, relationships have had a woman that was very aggressive on the front side, but then as soon as she got the commitment, then all of that just turned off. But you know, that's definitely something that I've experienced.
So you know, Dr. Johnson, you talked about it poetically from your show several times about the things that you went through as a man, and the velvet color, or I call it rose-colored glasses, was also the velvet portrait.
Mm-hmm.
Tell the audience about the things you went through as a man, and how was your schema afflicted based on the image that was perpetuated from so-called relics of the past.
Well, I think, you know, there's definitely a romanticized idea about what the union between the black man and woman is. And that, you know, again, especially for those of us that are coming out of the nationalist community, this is something we kind of pedestalize in a very kind of ideal way that I think didn't really, you know, make it easy for us in terms of the practical day-to-day reality. I mean, I myself was married for about 9 years. I was with my wife for 11. She passed away. And I can say that the biggest issue impacting us was that neither one of us had actually grown up seeing a functional day-to-day marriage.
Right.
Neither one of us. So we had these ideas about what that must look like. And that's a very different thing, especially if you have girls that are being socialized to think about marriage since they were children. I mean, she had books and designs about what marriage would be like that she was writing since she was 5. You know, most men, myself included, we didn't really think about marriage until, you know, just a little bit before we found somebody we might want to be with. So, you know, but the reality was neither one of us had those experiences. We'd mostly seen broken relationships. We'd mostly seen situationships that, you know, sometimes bared children, you know, things of that nature. And from there, we had an impractical base to try and build a life. And the only thing we really knew, we really agreed upon, is that we didn't want our child to grow up in a divorced household. But even that's enough to build a functional family if that's all you have to go on.
Right.
This is why I say this goes back to the 1960s, because this is a multi-generational issue. This isn't just about two people who are getting married. You have to, I mean, really, and this is common sense. When you marry someone, you're marrying their family. You're marrying into their family. They're marrying into yours. Even if you don't have one, the legacy of not having a family impacts your family, right? I mean, there are things that you don't know how to do, but ways of negotiating and engaging people that you may not have experience with, you know, especially like I married someone who had a huge family. You know, I myself, you know, it was just, you know, my mother and my sister, and occasionally we saw grandparents. I may have seen my father once a year. Very different family structures. You know what I mean? These kind of things, you know, really play into, you know, how we even, what our standard is for what it means to be in a union. You know, those are the kind of issues on the table. But I always come back to policy, because at the end of the day, women are also being socialized into relationships knowing that if this man doesn't make you happy, you can use the state to please him for what you want and move on to the next. We saw what just happened with Dr. Dre.
Right.
He's paid $3.6 million a year until she gets married again or is in another domestic union. Now, I had a professor, right, who was a mentor of mine. She's now in her 70s. She was married in the early 1980s. She got a divorce in the early 1980s. Her husband from the early 1980s is still paying alimony to today.
Wow.
She just retired from her work and she's still getting alimony today. They broke up in like 1981. You know what I mean? So when girls are shown across generations, from their grandmothers to their mothers to themselves and their daughters, that they can do this to men whenever a man doesn't help you meet your fantasy relationship, what kind of relationships do you develop? You develop relationships where women have a sense of power by proxy from the state, and men know they're walking into a wood chipper if they can't make her fantasies come true. Fantasies she's had since she was 5 years old, and you just start thinking about marriage when you met her.
Right.
Bad recipe.
Well, it sounds like, once again, that, I think women come into relationships being pragmatic. Men come into relationships based on what you said, Dr. Johnson, about the rose-colored glasses, or what I call the art of romanticism. Dr. Thunder, I want you to talk about some of the things you struggled with in your first marriage. Share what you want to share. And are marriages really worth it in this current milieu called America?
Yeah, I mean, without getting too specific, I mean, I'm in my second marriage.
Yes, sir.
My first marriage, I mean, it was exactly that. It was, we came from different kind of backgrounds. She didn't have a relationship with her dad, and I think that had played a big role.
Yes.
In the kind of lack of success that we had in our relationship. I of course, I'm very close with my dad, and at times she actually resented the closeness that I had with my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And to my knowledge, at least at the time, her dad was still alive, but hadn't been in her life since she was 4 or 5 or something. And I remember even having the conversation about her reconnecting with her father, how that was always a very contentious. It was always a lot of there's a lot of stuff buried there, and but I mean she was very, very aggressive. She was pouring it on, and I'm an introvert,
Right.
so I'm and I was in my early to mid 20s. So not only was I an introvert, I didn't have any game to speak of. All I was doing was working on, trying to make myself the best I could be, pursuing music, going to school, doing the stuff that I need to do. So, I didn't have no, crazy body count or anything like that. That's not what I was doing. I wasn't approaching women that way.
Right.
And so when she showed a certain kind of interest and then was very aggressive and assertive, I mean, that's kind of all it took. And I was simping, I'll admit, I have a series of videos on my channel called, Blue Pill Testimonials. And, there's 10 videos, there's a variety of stories on, various levels of my simping. But it wasn't until I was early 30s, close to mid 30s almost, that I kind of grew out of that, and that I was even able to tell a woman no, or step away from a particular kind of thing, and and that's all. I don't have anyone to blame for that. My dad, he taught me better than that, but I just that was just what was happening. I had so romanticized the idea that women can do no wrong,
right?
So that I just believed them, and over I believed them. But anyhow, as soon as it began, I mean, the whole thing took about 7 years to totally complete. But then she was out. So that's how that went. That's how the first one went down. But yeah, it's a tough thing. But I can speak at length about the sexual alienation. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's such a raw deal because there's nothing you can do. I mean, there's nothing you can do. I mean, I'm a religious man. And so not only would I wouldn't have wanted to step out, but then also, I'm not wired that way. I'm a one woman kind of guy.
Right,
That's how I've always been. And so that being the case, it's like, you're stuck. So if she's saying no, then, you know, and I'm like in my 20s, man. And it's like that was hardcore, man. That was really rough situation.
Well, you know, guys, you know, as a clinical therapist, I try to look at things through what I call the biopsychosocial spiritual model. But I came up with two terms. You know, I didn't create the term called simping, but I said there are two types of simps. There's a conscious simp and there's the unconscious simp. The conscious simp is like a lot of us men, we know in our internal hard drive what's going on is wrong, but we've been conditioned to go against our nature. And so the conscious simp stands for sacrificing important masculine principles. That's the conscious simp. A lot of men have been conscious simps, including myself. But then you got the unconscious simp. Those are men that don't know any better. Those are men sacrificing irrational male patterns. That's the unconscious simp. So, Dr. Johnson, let me ask you a question. Have men in America been consciously or unconsciously conditioned to be simps?
Well, I think that's definitely the case. It's partly built on the very Western idea of chivalry, which is a facet of patriarchy. So it's built into Western masculinity, but in the Black community, it's compounded by this framework where we're primarily raised by Black women. And what tends to happen when you're raised by women is they try to shape you into the man they want.
Yes.
I mean, that's essentially what mothers will do, even if they don't. The problem with that is it's kind of like if you ask someone to build a car and they don't know anything about cars, what they'll do is at best they'll build the outside design based on what they think it should look like, but they have no idea what the inner workings look like, what they should, how they function, what they are. So a lot of young men, because I'm Generation X, and we were the first generation to really be raised by single parents across the board to the extent that we have been, right? So we had mothers that basically taught us how to be really, and this is, you know, a bit edible, they taught us how to be husbands for them, but they didn't understand how to teach young men the inner workings of manhood. So we learned the performance, but we didn't learn the rationale. We didn't learn for many of us who didn't have fathers there on a day-to-day basis, and we didn't witness functional relationships often. So these kind of things set us up in many ways to really not know how to function in the way we need. And so that's kind of part of the dynamic there when you start talking about simping. So we learned this, we got this. And again, if you add this extra element of pro-Black, I mean, I'm the son of a Panther, right?
Oh, wow. Right.
So the kind of pro-Black, you know, idea about what it means, and this is key, what it means to be a good man, what it means to be a good Black man, right? The ideas we learned about what it means to be a good Black man were often sacrificial, and they were often about prioritizing her feelings, her worldview, her outlook, happy wife, happy life. We learned that she was the focal point we were supposed to protect and provide from the outside. And one of the things that morphed into over time, especially among Black women, the culture of Black women, it became what's yours is mine, what's mine is mine, as far as how women looked at it. So your resources, you sacrificing yourself to protect her and the family, all of that worked as long as it prioritized her and she didn't have to extend anything. Now, the other half to that is that what a lot of these women who were being introduced to feminism, because feminism was what really offsets the civil rights movement and reprioritizes the very idea of gender roles, especially in the Black community, right? So one of the things feminism teaches them is that it's not only all about them, but that they can now cherry pick from traditionalism, right? So protect and provide is still welcome. But what used to go with protecting and providing? When men protected and provided, there was an exchange of duties that took place, right? The men protected and provided. What did the women do? They prioritized, they nurtured, they took care of hearth and home. You know, there was an exchange going on. But what feminism taught people to do, most particularly women, was to expect the protection and provision, but provide nothing. Now, what does that mean? That means she can work part-time, she can work full-time, she can go to school, she can not work at all, she can have a baby, she can abort a baby, she has all the choices of what she wants to do with her life. Even if you're married to her, you have none. If she is pregnant with your first child and decides to abort it, what exactly can you do about it?
Right.
You have no recourse.
You have no recourse. I agree.
So that's the dynamic on the table, especially post 1980. Why by the time we get to Oprah Winfrey, and she starts taking these fairly obscure Black feminist ideas and putting them out into the public, we are now experiencing a major shift in gender understanding and gender dynamics, gender roles. And for men, we are completely blindsided. Blindsided. So we're still playing from an old playbook of black male sacrifice. And she has a whole new playbook of black female first.
So it sounds like to me, Dr. Johnson, that it's the worship of the female as being superior to the man, which in essence leads to what I call solipsism. You have a patent term in the manosphere called the concupiscence. We're going to talk about that. But to parrot what you said, Dr. Johnson, I created a term called the commodification of subjugation as it relates to solipsism. But then there's the commodification of glorification as it relates to building. There was a time where black men were commodities that worked together with their women to build infrastructures and communities. But now it appears that black men and a lot of men in America are commodities to be subjugated as it relates to her solipsistic needs. If you look at Smeagled was solipsistic because it was all about him. I want you to talk to the audience about solipsism and the concupiscence and how those two terms coalesce together from your best estimation.
Well, solipsism basically is a female priority of themselves, and this has its basis in nature to some extent. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know how many rational creatures would have more than one child. If men could have babies today, well, that's a whole nother discussion. But anyway, if men could actually have children, you doing it once, you really wouldn't do it again, right? But you have to have an irrational kind of relationship to nature and to reproduction to even want to do that. Because for men, having sex is, we enjoy it, we impregnate someone, and then from there, it's just a lot of waiting and so on and so forth. For her, she has to go through a whole transformation. So in one sense, that solipsism is part of a framework where women have a different relationship to reproduction. And it's somewhat natural. But what's happened is it's been mutated. It's been exploited. And again, when you factor in feminism, you also have to factor in the economy in the 1970s. The dollar bill flattens out. It becomes an imperative, even for white families, to now have two incomes. And so the market opens up for women workers. This becomes a whole different thing in the black community, because unlike the white community where women are coming into the workforce, black women have always been working. So this actually meant that they got elevated in terms of the type of access they had at the same time while black men were being pushed out. Because the 70s is also when the war on drugs kicks in, when increased incarceration kicks in, and jobs are overseas. So now men who've enjoyed at least a couple decades since World War II of stable, relatively stable employment, now they're finding themselves out of work. And the younger generation are coming into it. This is why hip hop is born in the ghetto, right? Because this is a generation of people that come into it with no job prospects, no employment, no education. They have nothing. So they have to build what they can out of what they have, which is essentially nothing. But the girls are going to school.
Right.
The girls are getting mid-level white collar job access. The girls are learning these corporate culture ideas and then coming to relationships with black men like, like you were functioning in a corporation and you work for her. This is how these things are playing out from the 70s through the 90s. And men are wholly unprepared for a lot of this. Wholly unprepared. But I apologize if I didn't answer your question.
No, you did it brilliantly. Listen, guys, we have a power-packed show. It doesn't get any better than the venerable Dr. THasan Johnson and the venerable Dr.Thunder. We got a freedom fighter with my man E. Spencer to the right, and he's gonna take Dr. Johnson to the promised land at some point. And we got my man Dr. Thunder, which is a theologian, and you have myself, the Kosher Clinician, a licensed therapist. Listen, there's a schema affliction on the minds of men in America. A lot of men are suffering in silence. And I started the Kosher Clinician out of a process called sublimation, meaning to turn something bad into something good, because many men went to the grave with dreams unfulfilled. You can hear the echoes of those men that are in the grave right now because nobody spoke power to their needs. So listen, if you like what I'm doing, please cash out 7 Smalls. Please cash out $7 Smalls. Like, share, hit the subscription button, and go check out my man, Dr. THasan Johnson, and subscribe to his channel on the Honest Report. And also go check out my man, Dr. Thunder, and get some of that soulful music that can bring power and tranquility to your soul. Dr. Thunder, and we're going to bring Eric in a minute. But Dr. Thunder, is it mental abuse to deny your husband sex in a relationship from your best estimation?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll tell you, see, women and men are different. And men, abuse from a man is going to tend to be some sort of act of violence. But abuse from a woman is going to be it's going to be done differently because they don't have the physical, they can't overpower us. So they have to outthink us, or they have to manipulate us in different ways. And one of the primary ways, and this has been, forever and ever on men, one of the primary ways that they manipulate us is with the feminine wiles, right? It's with their sexuality. And it's either with offering it in exchange for something that they want, or it's cutting it off because of some disapproval that they have with an aspect of your conduct. Or it could be, as it was what I believe in my first situation, that once it was surmised that we were not going to have children, that no longer was it necessary. It was not a necessary, it was a punishment. It was, this is really what I wanted out of this. Since that's off the table, it's no longer something that we're going to do.
Dr. Johnson, you talked in the past about your schema affliction. I know you were married for a period of time, and share what you feel like you're worthy that you want the audience to know. But I want you to tell the audience about the pain that you went through and the duration that you went through when you were married. And do you think you were a conscious simp or an unconscious simp as it relates to what you went through as a man when you were married in the past?
Oh, I think there was. I think I was both. I mean, there were layers of simphood going on. You have the basic programming you get, from how you're raised, and then you get the extra level, which I volunteered for, being and I'm still pro-black. Don't get me wrong. It's not. Right. I'm not saying that that's a negative, but I am saying with that came a series of assumptions about what a good black man was. That in many ways was self-destructive. It was very, that simpish thing. It wasn't just about, giving in to her every need. It was about putting my life on the line without even reflecting upon whether or not this was a relationship that offered an exchange. So when you get to my pain, one of the things I talked about on a show I did a couple months ago, about sexless marriages, as I talked about my own experience with it, where out of the 9 years we were married, 5 of those years were virtually sexless.
Oh my God! Wow, 5?
Yeah, it was 5.
Oh, no way in hell. No way in hell.
And she, and so and I never found out the reason for it, at least directly from her. I never found out why. I tried everything I could think of. I tried arguing, I tried discussion, we tried counseling, and it was nothing that I could find out directly. So here I am believing that the answer is marrying and building black families. And I do that, and I'm married, and I have a child on the way, and I'm in graduate school, and I'm doing all these things to build my velvet painting. And then one day my wife just stops.
Wow.
No explanation, no clarification, stops. I mean, it got to the point I heard this phrase in a movie. It was like we were roommates with running a small daycare. That's what it got to be like after a while. And the problem with that for me was not only what was going on in my relationship, but it dramatically impacted my view on marriage, because I was like, whoa, I didn't even know this could happen. I thought this happened to people in their 70s. And I figured by your 70s, at least before the advent of Viagra, who cares? Your wife stops giving it to you in your 70s. I didn't think much of it. But this happened when we were in our 20s and 30s. Right. So I'm like, if you can marry and your wife can completely shut down, do you know what kind of recourse you have? There's virtually nothing. I mean, look, what I found is if your wife shuts down, you got a couple choices. You can stay and suck it up. And I have boys who've been married for 20 years who are going through this very thing to this day. And they call me every month with the same issues. So you can suck it up and pretend like it's not happening, which is a certain kind of hell that you put yourself through. But many of these men are doing it to sacrifice for their children, right? So that's the velvet painting. You can get a divorce. Now, again, I grew up from a divorced household. So did she. I didn't want to see my son every 2 weeks. I didn't want to wonder what man was in the house, boyfriend she had that was near my son. Like, I didn't want to go through that, but that's an option. And then, of course, the other option you have is to cheat. Well, but the problem with cheating is you eventually get caught. I mean, you live with this person. It's not like you just seeing each other every other weekend. You know what I mean? So these were the options that I found left to me. And I'm thinking, I don't want any of these. I didn't get married to become a monk. That wasn't my goal.
Right.
But again, it was one of those things that nobody had ever explained to me that could happen. And I think, the more I started to speak out about this, the more men that I have writing me. I did this show a couple months ago. I still have men writing me like, yo, I'm living this now. I'm going through this now. And if I leave her, if I divorce her, I lose half of what I have.
Right.
So it's not
in the early church,
why men are pulling back.
Go ahead.
Yeah, in the early church, there was esteemed, were considered two paths to salvation. When I say early church, I'm talking about 2,000 years ago, early church. There's two paths. Okay. There is celibacy and marriage. Those are the two paths to salvation. All right. Now, obviously, we look at celibacy, we're like, man, especially a young man is like, well, that ain't the path I want. And then marriage, and I think it gets sort of romanticized, but marriage is every bit the challenge and struggle that living a life as a celibate would be, right? Except for it's worse now, because now you could actually be married but also celibate. And so those two are not supposed to accompany each other.
Right.
But it gets worse though. This is how it gets worse. You're already celibate in a marriage. Go out and have a girlfriend and watch how your wife acts.
Right. No, you're right. And you know what? You made a very profound point. I'm going to say this because I grew up conservative. I might not live out the mandates of the gospel like I used to, but I grew up Church of God in Christ, Pentecostal holiness. In my mind, it's a sin. She's cheating when she's denying you sex. She's actually cheating because she's depriving you based on the tenets of theology, what the Bible called the due benevolence. The due benevolence, actually those things which are good. So in my mind, if a woman is denying you her body because she signed up for the contract, you got to give her an admonition to step it up and get it together. Oh. If not, in my mind, if she's denying you her body, you have a right to either divorce her or do what you need to do until you can move on. Because the gospel say the only time a woman should deny her husband sex is when she's fasting and praying. That's the only time. Right. Well, after that, the gospel say, agreed on it. And you both agreed on it. Both agreed on it. Yes, sir. Right. And you both come back together so that the devil won't come into it. So a lot of American women are leading their men astray if that man decides to go out and step out because she's not fulfilling her duty. And I'm going to tell men to the ones who are listening, you are a fool if you keep contributing to a woman that's not giving you sex. I don't blame her. I'll blame you. You need to start developing an exit strategy.
Well, go ahead. Here's the thing, though. There's a new religion that's at play. And it actually supersedes and undergirds most religious traditions in the West. Right. And if it hasn't hit your religion, just wait. It's coming. And it's called feminism.
Right.
Kevin Samuels beautifully dealt with last year when he talked about the way feminism kind of infiltrated the Christian church.
Right.
But, it's happening with brothers who are practicing Yoruba and Ifa. It's happening with Muslims. It's happening in different ways and to different degrees. But here's the thing. When you made a statement a moment ago that she is not following, what she's supposed to be, actually she is, according to the new religion. And the religion is that women can do whatever they want, whenever they feel like, and you need to accept it. And the degree to which you are not a constructive, positive, supportive male is the degree to which you will not allow her to do this. Now, I'll give you an example. It can be in terms of sex. Try sitting down, whether it's the Quran or whether it's the Bible, and you're trying to walk her into why she should give you her body. Watch how that discussion goes if she doesn't want to. That's the first thing. But we can apply it to other areas. I had a situation where I was in graduate school. I literally was working 4 jobs, one of which was full-time while going to school full-time. She was out of work. So when I left at 7 in the morning one morning, the house was a mess. When I got home at 10 o'clock at night, the house was a mess. Of course, there was no food. And when I said, what's going on? Wait a minute. I'm a woman. I'm not a servant. I'm not a slave. Now, I didn't marry a rampant feminist. I married a woman who did not seem anything like that. But when pressed into a corner, those feminist ideas that are so popularly extended in popular culture came right out, which meant that as long as I provided a roof, shelter, clothing, all these other kind of things, trips, bills were paid, she could receive all of that. But when it came to me asking for a meal, when it came to me asking for a clean home, now all of a sudden I'm a woman and I shouldn't have to be a slave. See, this is the dynamic that feminism allows them. It allows them to have a cherry-picked traditionalism that you yourself have very little in response to argue back with once you're in the marriage itself. And if you push too far and she initiates a divorce, which is fine as long as you're ready for that. And many of us aren't ready for that emotionally or financially.
You know, this effect of feminism on everything in the West is why the passport bros, if they're going to wife someone up, they need to stay in that other country. Because as soon as you bring a woman here, it won't be long before that feminism will be right in your house. You know, I was watching Uncle D, Dennis Sperling, and he was talking about with his fiance how he's not allowing her to have certain kinds of associations, and the reason is because he sees how some of these other folks are talking, and he knows what's going to happen. He knows they're going to start filling her head with X, Y, and Z, and you have to be, you know, part of marriage. Part of a relationship is the man is actually supposed to be protecting the woman from the effects of society. So from not just physically, but is supposed to be protecting her. And unfortunately, the way we have it set up now is it seemed that we're doing them harm by trying to protect them from stuff that we know that is going to likely harm them, but not only harm them, it's going to probably destroy our relationship. It's an impossible situation. Like, what do you do?
Well, I'm gonna tell you what.
Into this point that Dr. THasan Johnson was saying earlier about, you know, not wanting to, you know, wait, you know, see your kid every other week. You know, I'm going to tell you in a very real way, and maybe this is going to seem, look, you know. Especially if you have a son, you need to do whatever you have to do and struggle it out, because you know what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen, and you know how devastating it's going to be on that boy to be raised basically by his mom, and all of the negative things that can happen. And you know, that's, you know, and that's a heck of a reason to stay married.
Yeah.
But you know, honestly, it's a real reason though. It's
can I add to that, brother?
Go ahead, Doc.
Go ahead.
There's one of the things I talked about in a recent show I did. There's a young man who's an actor, and his name escapes me, forgive me, but he was in the recent Superfly remake. And he had a couple of videos, one with Umar Johnson, where he was really frustrated at the mother, his own mother, in real life, and how she had actually raised him, how she had lied to him, how she had abused him. And he finally, at the age of, I think, 28, had a sit down with his father. And this is something I said in response to that exchange he talked about. For many of us, there is a father somewhere that, you know, we've learned to hate, we've learned to be frustrated with, but we never got his side of the story. Now, that's not to say that men are perfect. It's not to say women are perfect. It is to say I'm a big advocate of getting the other side of the story. And for some of us, there is a father who has a box of receipts that you've not sat down and looked through yet. And by receipts, I mean, this young man, when he told his story, he said, my mother said, you never sent us one child's support payment. This man pulled out a box and showed receipt after receipt about continued child support payments. And that was the thing that really woke him up to the reality of what he was being lied to about. You know, it woke him up that he actually had a father who cared, but didn't know it. Now, I'm not all saying we have that, you know, Cinderella story where there's some perfect father waiting for us. If you didn't know your father, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, as human beings, we all err. And when it comes to Black fathers who often haven't had a chance to tell their side of the story, you might find, if you sat down with them, that you'll find out more about the other half of your life you don't know about once you have that sit down. But when you're raised to actually hate or have no relationship with your father, and this is something Dr. Thunder was talking about in terms of his wife, right? It has an impact on you and how you interact with others and how you deal with your own family. I mean, how does she treat her son if she has no idea what masculinity is and has no inherent respect for it? Right. So these are things that we have to kind of get out on the table. And I tell men, sit down with your father, have that conversation. I don't care if he was the worst man in the world. Sit down with your father, and I guarantee you'll learn something you didn't know.
Well, listen, we got an antidote to that. We got Brother Eric Spencer from BMO called Black Man Options. I got it right this time, Eric. And basically what Eric is trying to tell brothers that there are women from other countries that are actually fit, feminine, and they're very cooperative. And they've been trained in patriarchal cultures where they're conditioned to more or less love and treat their husbands right. Now, listen, guys, we got a power-packed show. We got Dr. THasan Johnson. I call him the Falcon. Falcon and what's that guy dang Captain American Falcon. And we got Colossus up here, Dr. Thunder. And of course, I'm Luke Cage. But I'm Luke Cage. But Eric, is it a myth that bringing women back to America is a wrong choice, or it depends on how she was raised and her spiritual upbringing? And tell the audience who you are, brother.
All right. Well, first off, salute to Dr. Thunder and Professor THasan Johnson, and also BGS in the chat. My name is Eric Spencer. I am one of the admins for the Black Man's Option. It was the group that was originally started by Charles Tyler. 2017, Charles Tyler passed away in Brazil. Wow. And we have continued his legacy. We have a group of people that are working behind the scenes to give brothers options. And our results speak for itself. Right. If you've seen Dr. Neal's latest and greatest video, at least the one when he came back, that's what BMO can do for you. Right. So, THasan Johnson, Dr. Thunder, come on down.
Come on down.
now to answer your question, it depends on you as a person, because I have friends that are married to Brazilians that live in the States. Yeah. I also have a friend that is engaged to be married January the 2nd. So it is happening, and it can happen. You just have to make sure that the woman that you're dealing with comes from a family, a stable family. But even if they don't, they're still socialized to respect their men. Feminism hasn't set in like that there. They're trying to. The problem is there's too much competition and there's not enough men to go around. See, a lot of the things that you guys are talking about, I understand. But when you come to the Black Man's Option, we show you a different dynamic that most Black men are not accustomed to. They're not accustomed to being around feminine women. They're not accustomed to being around abundance of women. And they're not accustomed to being around women that are aggressive and that know the worth of their men. That sexless marriage stuff, you think it goes on in Brazil? Oh, no. Right. Why? Because it's a fresh crop that comes up every single month. And when you go there, guys literally lose it because they have not been exposed to the amount of general beauty of the women. I'm not saying that they're all 8s, 9s, and 10s, no. But when you go out, you're going to see something you like. Whether you're going to the store, you're going to pump gas, hell, if you just going to the post office and get some stamps, you're going to see something that you like. And you get accustomed to seeing it over and over and over again. Right. And you can approach them. Hey, how are you doing? Fine. And they're going to give you all kind of open play. Right. And for a lot of guys, it's alien because we've been here in the Matrix. Yeah. We're stuck behind enemy lines. And a lot of guys don't have reference to compare it to. Yeah. Because when they go there, they see what femininity could really be like.
Yeah, yeah.
And they understand there's competition for those men. So when they come back to the States, they have a different frame that they can pull from. Right. They can say, I don't have to put up with this. You know what? I got my passport and I can book a flight.
Yeah.
You can be replaced.
Right.
You know, that's profound. And I want to say, I think when you see true femininity, it even adds points to a woman's beauty.
It does.
Yesterday I was at a dealership, you know, picking up some stuff, right? And the woman at the desk was not attractive and on any physical level, but she was so nice and so effeminate and so sweet that I actually looked twice at her for a moment. And it wasn't so much about I want to go get with her, but I just noticed kind of the energy. It was like a breath of fresh air just being around that kind of femininity, and it made her prettier than she actually was. You know what I mean? Exactly. And just on a physical level.
Exactly. When you step off that plane in Brazil, it hits you in the face. And we literally have to explain this to guys because a lot of them don't understand it. We have a process where we introduce you to being around those type of women, because left uncontrolled and unchecked, a lot of men lose it because they don't believe it. They're in denial about a lot of things. Seven's laughing, but he knows. He's seen it. And
I've seen it.
Yeah, and everything that they try to use to deter you, oh, they're not black. Oh, yes, they are.
They are black.
Oh, they're not feminine. Oh, yes, they are.
Right.
But they don't know how to cook. Look, they would rather go to the supermarket and cook than you take them out. And they are very submissive. Right. They are very accommodating. And they know that you being in their environment is like them hitting the lottery. Now, of course, they're going to look at you for resources. What woman isn't? But at the same time, they're looking to be married. Back to your point, you're marrying the families. A lot of Brazilians, they're big on family. They interact with family. When you marry them, you marry their family, and they want to welcome you, and they welcome the family. And it can be overwhelming. Myself, I came from a big family. My mother and my father had 5 siblings, actually 6 siblings on each side. And my parents were together for 51 years until my father's passing.
Right. That's a blessing.
So I understand what you're saying as far as socialized to look for wives when there aren't any.
Right.
But when you go, and I just use Brazil, but a lot of other foreign places are like that too. When you change the environment, you're changing your perspective because you've been looking through relationships through the rose glass lens of the matrix.
Right.
You take those same glasses and you go to Brazil and look through, and you're going to see a whole lot more, because if you are taking care of your business and you're giving her that romanticism, you ain't gonna get rid of her. Right. She's gonna lock you down. You're not gonna be able to leave the house. You're not gonna be able to go nowhere. She's gonna make sure that you are taken care of. There ain't gonna be no sexless marriage.
That's the problem. Yeah, that's the problem is and Dr. THasan Johnson said this before, that we're still using this old playbook.
Right.
And it's a new game. It's different rules. We're still trying to do the same things. And so in my, in all of my simping, I was programmed in, I was programmed and I was looking at things a particular way, but there wasn't actually anything wrong with what it was that I was doing. It was just not for the right women
in the environment
or for the right woman. If it had been a woman that could see what it was that I was and the kinds of things that I wanted to do, the value of that, then it wouldn't have been a problem. I want to give a definition for us, a working definition. So sexless marriage, it's considered a sexless marriage if it's less than 10 times per year.
Oh, goodness.
if it's 10 times or less per year, that is considered a sexless marriage. And so there's probably folks, maybe some people that are listening, maybe some people that will see this as like, well, I'm still, we still have, every other month we still getting it. So it's not a sexless marriage. Well, yes, it is. That's considered a sexless marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple other things I wanted to say. I just want to make sure that if someone sees this that knows me or knows or knows my current wife, she understands that I was not talking about her. And my current wife is fit, feminine, friendly, cooperative, submissive, and she had no kids before we got married. And she's wonderful, and she in that whole thing about being feminine and just the value of that. That's probably the thing that caught me more than anything about her. Is just that it's just and she's cooperative. It's no fighting and stuff. Now, much of my woes were the first were the first wife, but thank the Lord that is over. It wasn't my choice that it ended either. And see, that's another thing. Men tend to stay committed, even when stuff is horrible. Even when, it was a sexless marriage. It was X, Y, and Z. She was using all kind of manipulation and tactics and everything else. But I was like, look, I'm staying. I said I was going to stay X, Y, and Z, and then she ended up splitting.
But you know what, Dr. Thunder, clinically in behavior psychology is based on a construct called positive and negative reinforcement. And so when you stay, you're actually rewarding bad behavior. Leaving doesn't mean you're divorcing her. It just means I'm going to take a damn reprieve until you get your act together. Because what I've learned with women, they only respect power and strength. And so what you're doing by staying, you're actually reinforcing that negative schema in her mind that thinks she's better, which in essence is giving you an affliction. There's no way in hell, excuse my language, I'm going to suffer in silence for that. I'm not, I can't
do it. Go ahead,
man.
Handle your business.
I can't do it, man, because that's emotional abusive for me. But Dr. THasan Johnson, let's talk about a condition or a term that I call the Latina nexus, where women are in California learning to be wives as it relates to black men. I heard a guy by the name of Eclectic Tyrone that says Brazilian women are socialized to not marry dark-skinned men. So we're going to talk about that, but let's talk about the Latina nexus that you've experienced, Dr. THasan Johnson, at your school in Fresno, California. Let's talk about that. And then, Eric, is it true that Brazilian women are not socialized to marry dark-skinned men? But go ahead, Doc.
No. Hell to the no. Hell to the no. I didn't want to overstep, but I saw that comment come through, and see, that's what happens when you talk to people that have never been someplace and talk to locals and really know what's going on in the country. You going by what somebody told you. I've been there 8 times, and I have friends that live in different parts of the country that I talk to, and I know what's really going on, and you don't understand it. The colorism argument here in the States, nah. The colorism argument in Brazil is real because you can see it. But that socialized dark-skinned men, that's a lie.
But then too, as American men, you're coming in with a different income base. I mean, this is a very class dynamic. If you're working at McDonald's right now as a black man in America, you're not likely going down to Brazil trying to find a wife. The kind of brothers that I'm seeing that are going are brothers of means to one level or another. I mean, this is where we are in the black community, where if you earn $65,000 a year, which many of us know, like in New York or LA or San Francisco, that's nothing. But if you're earning $65,000 a year and you're in the top 10% of earners, top 15% of earners in the black community. That's so when it comes to that, going to another country, you're going to bring in a whole different status, which plays out differently. So that color strata may be something that exists, to those who are in Brazil, who are part of that culture. But at the end of the day, like I learned this going to Jamaica. At the end of the day, they never forgot that I was American. There was never a point where I wasn't American, and that played out in how they interpreted me. You know what I mean?
Yes.
In terms of the resources that I could bring to bear. But Seven, you asked a specific question. What were you asking?
I was asking about a term I call the Latina nexus, meaning.
Oh, okay.
Right. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah. So basically, this is something I've talked about online a couple of times, and Kevin Samuels picked it up and talked about it on No Jumper. Basically, I've been teaching a Black male studies course for the last decade or so at Fresno State. And one of the things I noticed is early on, there were different populations of women that would take my class for different reasons. When I started the class, it was mostly Black women. And I found over the course of the first 2 years that they mainly took the class so I could browbeat the men. And I was coming out of a graduate school with a feminist kind of training, so that worked. When I began to shift from that, they stopped taking the class as much because I started speaking up for Black men and boys, and I started giving Black men and boys voice. Now, what I began to notice from there was that more white women began to take the class, not because of something I said, but because they wanted to learn how to take care of the Black boyfriends. They wanted to understand their Black boyfriends. Now, in the last 4 to 5 years, I would say that white female population has been replaced by Latinas who are coming into the class to try and understand Black men. And I live in Central California, so interracial relationships between, which is mostly Mexicans here, in terms of the Latino population, and Fresno is mostly Mexican. You're seeing interracial relationships between Mexican and Mexican women and Black men is not uncommon at all here.
Listen, guys, we're going to respond to that. Listen, guys, if you like the show, everybody get the thumbs up. Please like and share this program and help this channel grow as many men are suffering through a schema affliction. I'm honored to have the panel of the distinguished guests on this panel. But listen, guys, let's get up the cash apps. Let's get the cash apps up. Go check out Dr.THasan Johnson. Go check out Dr.Thunder. Subscribe to their channel. But cash out 7 Smalls. I am a licensed clinical therapist. And I tell you guys, these shows are very time consuming. But listen, I love the brotherhood. I love the brothers that are listening to the show. I love the people in the audience. So please show your love and support by donating to $7 Smalls. And also go check out Dr.THasan Johnson at the Honest Report, and also Dr. Thunder. Eric, back to you, brother. Let's talk about I think we said the dark skin thing. I forgot what we were talking about, but go ahead, Eric. I want you to back more or less backpedal on what Dr. Johnson was talking about, and then Dr. Thunder, I want you to come back in and peg it back. But go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, to Professor Johnson's point, yeah, they do look at you as gringo, because you stand out. But there's so many other things that go along with that. Everybody thinks that Brazil is a third world country. And when we come, we expose you to where you have Louis Vuitton, Gucci, these high-end stores. People are driving Mercedes-Benz, Lexus. They have neighborhoods that have multi-million-dollar homes in them. And yes, that's not the vast majority of them, but there are people there that are making money that are comparable to the United States. So yes, you come in with a status that you're a gringo, but at the same time, there's a certain thing about us as Black men, us being socialized to respond to our women a certain way that kind of connects with how Brazilian, especially Afro-Brazilian women, because in their country, they think because their hair is curly or if they're a little bit browner, then they're told that they're not as beautiful. But when we come in and we're pursuing them, the white Brazilians are looking at us at a higher status, but are trying to figure out, well, why are you talking to women that we feel are lesser because of the complexion? And it kind of throws things off because they're not used to seeing dark-skinned men come in and command attention. Because when we move, we're 20, 30 deep. They're looking at us like who are y'all? And that gets noticed. And I always tell the guys at the beginning of the trips, they're watching you. They want to know, they want to talk to you. They're very open and friendly and things like that. But you have to really be there and understand what's going on. You can't take the playbook from the States and think you're going to run it in Brazil, because you're not. Dark-skinned men are approached by white Brazilians because they encourage the mixing. But until recently, they've just now been distinguishing themselves as Afro-Brazilians through their hair. They're starting to have, Brazil is going through the civil rights movement for them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're seeing. You're seeing them starting to wear their afros. You're seeing starting them to distinguish themselves as Afro-Brazilian. And they have the foundation to continue that because there's so many of them that they've been able to maintain a lot of their African culture. You see a lot of it in the samba, the food. When you start going to the northern regions in Salvador and Belo Horizonte and other places like that, you really see that they're starting to embrace that. And you as an African-American man with a higher status, with the same skin tone, you empower them. And it's a wonderful feeling because they already are enamored by you. They're like, wow, you're American. I haven't met an American before. You know, a friend of mine, we went to Belo Horizonte and they had never met Black Americans. And they thought we were superstars. And they wanted to talk to us. They took pictures with us. And it's just a different type of environment that you have to get used to. The femininity would knock you off your feet. The beauty would knock you off your feet. The culture, the food, everything that they have to offer. No, it's not paradise, but I'm telling you right now, a lot more African-American men are looking for wives, and they're making the effort to go to Brazil to find those wives. And I guarantee you, they're going to find them because I have too many friends personally that I know that are married to Brazilians. They're not going to advertise it. They're not going to put their business out there. And we're not going to do that either. We're going to respect their privacy. But I know it's going on. Yeah. And they're very receptive to it. And they're not looking for a green card. They really aren't. But if they come back, they're already socialized. That's the thing where a lot of guys don't get. They're already socialized to be wives. Even if you bring them back into this environment, all you have to do, I'm not saying all, but show them the difference. Because there's another thing too that's going on that's not being talked about. The environment has changed. So men are starting to smell themselves and understand their value. And it come at the worst time because now we have data. We know that there's 2 more million Black women. And now we're on a global market. I don't have to shop in this store. Shout out to Edward Anderson. I can go shop in Colombia, Thailand, Morocco, Brazil. The store is wide open. And there's a shortage of these men, like you said, 65,000, you're in the top 20. We'll translate that to a world economy. You're in the top 5%.
Right. Yeah. Well, top 10 in America is 65,000. So
right.
I hear what you're saying.
So you take that to some place where Brazil right now, the exchange rate is like 520 to 1.
Wow.
Dude, you in the top 1% in their country.
In their country, right. Dr. Thunder, you look, you wanted to say something. Before you say something, Dr. Thunder, Dr. Johnson talked about this counterculture movement that's seen in many religions about the divine feminine being glorified. In your best estimation, is this the spirit of Jezebel from a theological perspective and also the spirit of the Antichrist? And if so, I want you to share that from your theological perspective.
Yes. So, no, I'm going to say, I will say this, that, you know, I was just about to just bring up, you know, where is the church? Where is the church on these issues?
Right.
On what Black men are facing. I mean, if you look at the attendance of Black men in Black churches, it's been on a steady decline, and part of it is because there's not been, you know, the message that has been preached has not been applicable to the kinds of experiences that, you know, Black men have. That's part of the reason, you know, and part of the reason is because when you try to bring up issues that you're facing, the solution is just to man up, you know, or in mass, there would be a pretending that issue is not a real issue.
Right.
When probably half of the married couples in the church are facing some kind of sexless marriage or something. They'll try to act like it's not an issue, like this ain't really happening, or you just have to just deal with that. And even where as what Mr. Palmer would call simping forces, are there around every corner, protecting the women. I had an encounter with the simp enforcer. I did an episode on my on that Blue Pill Testimonials about sexual alienation. And in that, I didn't say anything about what women should do. I wasn't, saying anything about women. I was saying, this is my experience. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem fair that this should be allowed, that it should be okay. And the simp enforcer trying to have a public argument with me on Twitter, and then I took it off of Twitter, and we ended up doing a little bit behind the scenes. I ended up just letting it go because I could see that the person was not going to change their perspective, but they more or less were trying to defend the woman's perspective.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't get what's going on here. So I can't even say my experience, something that happened to me, something that I believe that was unfair that happened to me. I can't even speak about that without you trying to, take the hypothetical women's perspective, because they don't even know who it is that I'm talking about. Because I tried to hide people's identities because I'm not trying to out folks. So but that stuff is all over the place. I did on my Thunder's Thoughts program. I did a show called "Was Adam the First Simp?"
Yes.
And of course, the answer to that question is yes.
Yes.
And you can see right there in the garden, you can see him prioritizing pleasure over purpose. And what ultimately will help men to weed out certain kinds of folks and poor mate selection for men, what ultimately will help them to weed that stuff out is by having the proper priorities in their life. And so from my perspective, God is at the top, and God is connected with purpose. So that's like one and the same. So the relationship that I have with God is expressed through the purpose that he gives me. And so everything that I do, that is lined up with purpose is going to put me in a certain alignment with God. And then everything else has to come after purpose. It must come after purpose. If you look at Adam in the garden, he was given particular tasks. He had to name all of the animals. This is before Eve was even around. Now, consider what kind of monumental task that was. That was a long kind of task, very involved. So he had himself together before he was even looking towards a woman. And that, at least theoretically, was supposed to bolster him. But even with that, he still makes the same mistake and does the same thing that seems like all of us at some point will make, which is to prioritize stuff that is not important or not as important over the stuff over the long game. Men are supposed to look for the long game. We're supposed to be securing things for the future. We're not supposed to be prioritizing stuff that happens in a singular moment. And but anyhow, I'm saying this just to say that I think there is a connection between choosing the kind of person, the kind of mate that would likely withhold, based on certain signals. So, for instance, before my first marriage, there was all kinds of signs and signals that she was wrong. She was wrong for me, that she was likely going to do exactly what she did. All of those signs were clearly there. But because that was the most important thing to me, that short term thing, and I wasn't thinking about the long term, that's why I fell into that trap. And since then, fell in the trap a bunch more times, but I still didn't figure it out.
Eric Spencer, I want to ask you a question. And this goes back to a show that Kevin Samuels did a couple of days ago talking about the cold winter. Many American women don't believe that the fat meat is greasy. Many don't believe that the fat meat is greasy. I want you to talk about, from a cognitive distortion and delusional perspective, why so many women don't believe that the fat meat is greasy. And based on what Kevin Samuels talked about as it relates to winter time is coming, what do you see as a prognostication to the conditions that are going to confront us with automation coming on the scene, and many men that are divesting, going abroad to find greater pastures? What do you see based on that perspective?
So, of course, the fat meat is greasy is an analogy that women don't believe what men say because we've been talking and there haven't been any consequences. But in the last 5 years, and especially with the COVID, you're starting to see that change in the dynamic. Guys are walking away. Women are complaining about not getting approached. They're complaining about not going on dates. They're complaining about not being protected. But you asked for this, so you got it. And some of them are still in denial about it. Some of them are doubling down because of the election and Black girl magic and all these other slogans that they have used throughout the years. But it's coming. And it's not going to be one big boom. It's going to be death by 1,000 cuts. You're going to have brothers walking away. That's one cut. You're going to have brothers dating out. That's another cut. You have brothers that have already been through the ringer and aren't even dealing with you at all and just living their best life. That's another cut. And you have brothers that have passports that have been to promised lands outside the matrix, and they're not coming back. Plus, you're talking about the Generation X women that have nobody because of their mouths and their attitudes, and the Zs who are already dating out and telling them they're not putting up with it. So when Mr. Samuels uses the term of the cold winter, best believe it's going to be real cold, especially if you got to get out there and chop your own wood, start your own fire, maintain that fire, shuck the corn, make sure the kids are in bed, and guard the gate.
Well,
you're strong and independent, and there's no man, and I don't need a man. Well, sweetheart, here it is.
And that's real, because
that's real.
Let's also look at the environment we're in. The judges are finding the rent moratoriums to be unconstitutional.
I haven't even gone into that.
You see what I mean? So the rent moratoriums are going up. People are being pushed out, and we know this has already been happening. When you start talking about Black and brown poor folks, they've already been pushed out because they can't afford to sue nobody anyway. So there are plenty that aren't waiting on judges and laws to change to push folks out. But with the moratoriums ending, that's on the horizon. Unemployment has been through the roof. The childcare industry is still in disarray, from my understanding, which of course inadvertently impacts women. So when you start talking about the winter is coming, that's real. And the whole issue about where men fit into that, the impact that I think is really going to hit a lot of Black women in particular is it's not just that men are leaving, it's the men they want are leaving.
Bingo.
Sociologist Robert Staples talked about this in the late 70s. He pointed out that middle-class Black men had their pick. They could pick whoever they wanted, and most of the time they picked women of a certain caliber then, right? That's in the late 1970s.
Right.
After my wife died, when I looked at 30 of my brothers who were around my age, I'm 46, you know what I mean? I'm Generation X. When I looked at 30 of my brothers, the overwhelming number of them, I'd say about 26 out of 30, were married to women who they weren't necessarily straight from other countries, but they were either mixed or they came from other countries and they came to the U.S., right? So Haitian, Jamaican, South American, African, these men were with women from other places. And I was wondering where this, because there was no discussion, and this was pre-Black Manosphere, pre-YouTube, pre-social media. This was already happening. Now we're in an era where there are men who have the means to leave. They have passports. It's a whole different level.
Right.
It's a whole different level. So that winter cold dynamic is real.
And Professor Johnson, to dovetail onto what you're saying, don't think they're not trying to infiltrate. On our last trip, Coach Greaves, Al Greaves, that's what we call him, Coach, he had an encounter where 2 African-American women were there, and the quote unquote was they need to get their stuff together because they see the competition. See, it's one thing to talk about, oh yeah, they down in Brazil, they ain't black, or they ain't this, or they ain't that. But for you to go down there and thinking you're going to compete in an away game and you ain't even varsity, you in the practice squad. That's real talk. So they acknowledge that. See,
what happened?
So Coach Greaves was coming out. He was coming to meet us, and there are 2 African-American women there at one of the restaurants, and he just happened to eavesdrop, hear what they were saying. And in the conversation, one told the other, girl, we got to get our SH together. And then when Coach Greaves went up and approached them, introduced who he was and stuff, and he asked about the comment, they were silent. So see, you're running down there thinking that what men are saying isn't true, but you're coming back with your feelings hurt because it is true. And you're just getting a sample in Rio. You're getting a microcosm of what there is there.
But they're not going to Ghana. They're not going to the Philippines. They're not going to the DR, the Guatemala. Brothers are definitely looking, because here's the core of it. With our women, quote unquote, here in the U.S., there's never been a sense, or I shouldn't say never, but there hasn't in several decades been a sense that they needed to compete.
Right.
They view black men, and this is the way we've all been socialized, because this goes back to my nationalist training. I bought into it too. I believed we belong to them, they belong to us, so on and so forth. End of discussion, right? But as long as you have that kind of belief framework where black men are just something to be picked off the tree at your leisure, and Kevin Samuels does an excellent job of pointing out how that usually doesn't happen until the mid-30s for many women, right? They decide at that point they want to pick a high-value black man off the high-value tree, right? This idea comes out of a larger cultural milieu where these women actually believe that at the end of the day, black men belong to them and they will grace us with their presence at their leisure. So when black men started marrying women, and here's the thing, the way they frame it is black men are after white women. But what they're finding, and this is what I think the 2 women in Brazil are finding out, it's not about white women. It's about women who are cooperative, women who come from a culture where they appreciate masculinity and more than anything can demonstrate respect for men. And when you talk about that, it changes the game. So you're seeing all these black men walking in with women of color, or maybe even black women from other countries. Now you can't just dismissively say these men are just after white women. No.
You're absolutely correct. And like I've shared with Seven before, Brazil is a trigger word for these women. It's their kryptonite.
Yeah.
I mean, they go into a serious meltdown when you say Brazil. I mean, I had an encounter at an Essence Music Festival where I told the woman I'm off the dating market. My wife's coming from Brazil. She literally followed me out. After the conversation, she literally followed me out into the Hyatt ballroom area. And I told her, I said, she walked up on me. I said, lady, you don't even know me, but you feel comfortable enough to walk up on me and not know me. If you had been a man, I would have knocked you out. And this is why men are leaving, because you have masculine energy. You have no respect for your men. And like you alluded to, you have to compete for the men, the top tier men. It's not the men that you want, it's the men that you need. But those men are waking up. And I say this a lot of times. Alan Roger Curry was ahead of his time when he wrote The Beta Male Revolution, because that's what you're seeing. But really, it's not that they're beta males. They are the alphas. They're just in a beta environment.
Okay.
Right.
So when you take these same men and put them in a different environment, they get a different result. And the other thing too, that age bias thing that's in the States, you don't see that. I get approached by women half my age all the time.
Right.
And when I tell them how old I am, they think I'm lying. I tell brothers, I say, get your health up, stay in shape, be fit, and be friendly. And you're going to do way better in Brazil, Colombia, Thailand, all the other things. Why? Because black men are prizes. And they don't tell you that in this country. They tell you that you're less than.
Right.
But when you go to the country, you have Africans trying to imitate and pass themselves off as African Americans. What does that tell you? And when they know that we're African Americans, because they want to talk to you. We don't have to be Will Smith. All we have to do is be us.
But you know, part of what we're looking at too is here in America, in particular, in the West in general, we have a culture where what we talk about in Black male studies is anti-Black misandry. And anti-Black misandry is really baked into our culture, where disrespecting men is part of the culture. Downplaying them, dismissing them is part of the culture, to the degree that Black men raised in this system believe it. Right. So when I tell brothers that for every age group, 18 to 65 in the African American community, did you know Black men actually earn more than Black women at every age level from 18 to 65? And most people don't know. We actually have more Black male entrepreneurs than female, but we wouldn't know that because you don't hear about that. Right. Black men are actually doing better and worse at the same time than Black women. But when it comes to this conversation of finding identifiable husband material, Black women will argue that there aren't any, but that's because they're using a standard of the top 5%. Right. The reality is, if you just deal with the men on your level who are actually doing better than you, but they're on your level, there are actually more of those men available than you ever thought. Right. Only the top 5%, Black men get dismissed across the board, which feeds the frustration where Black men are looking elsewhere for cooperative women who actually want to be with them and have a respect for them.
Listen, Dr. Thunder, give me 1 minute, brother. I know you want to come in. Thank you, J.S. Huggins, for donating the Cash App. Thank you, brother. I appreciate that donation. You know, Dr. Thunder, I'm going to ask you a question, and Dr. THasan Johnson, I want you to piggyback on it. But, you know, when we talk about, as a clinical therapist, we look, you know, most people are trained under the feminist theory lens. And so you were also, Dr. THasan Johnson, trained more or less or influenced by feminism. How did feminism make you a simp? And then, Dr. Thunder, I want you to more or less break it down based on your training when you went to college and also as a theologian. So go ahead, Dr. THasan Johnson.
When I was doing my doctoral work was when I was introduced formally to gender studies. I had taken gender studies courses throughout undergrad and my master's, but it really wasn't until I got to my doctoral level. And my primary mentor was a Black feminist. And so what I learned is to basically see the world through the vantage point of this theoretical Black feminist lens. And there are all the kinds of talking points. And especially this was a time period where intersectionality was becoming huge, right? Created by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, I think it was. You know, this idea that Black women were the most oppressed in terms of race, class, sex, and gender. And the argument was that Black men were just a little more privileged than them because we were men. What I didn't find out until after I left graduate school is that actually Black men were not privileged by gender. They were actually oppressed more because of their gender. And I found Black feminist scholars who were breaking from feminism when they started to look at the data and found out that this was not true. So as I began to turn to data more, I began to look at people like Dr. Tommy Curry, brother Dr. Ronald Neal. We started to exchange resources, exchange work. We started to find in terms of the research that Black men actually live a life very different from any other demographic. And once we began to really delve into that, a lot of these kind of lies, and of course, challenging misandry became, you know, part of what we had to do. But a lot of it has to do with really the negative kind of stereotyping of Black men that even happens within the Black community, within Black families, to such a degree that men and boys are being raised in a culture where they're told they're monsters, they're trifling, they're not needed, they're not necessary, when all the data points to the opposite.
Let me ask you a question, Dr. Thunder, from a theological perspective. If a woman is not obeying her husband, that's a dirty word. But if a woman is not obeying her husband, does she deserve provision and protection. Because in theology, Sarah called Abraham Lord. That's why I use the title Lords of the Ring, because men are supposed to be the head in their homes and not to abuse power, but to more or less give what I call kosher patriarchy to the women that they so-called love. So if a woman is not obeying and honoring and respecting her husband, should a man provide for his wife?
No. But, you know, and I'll also say, if you flip the question, I mean, you know, is a man that doesn't provide, you know, for his family, is he worthy of having a wife? No. The answer is no. And now we're quick to answer that question, no. And women would be in here amening, saying no.
Right.
But when you flip it the other way, when it has to do with what it is that men are supposed to receive from their part of the deal, they gave up something, they're supposed to receive something. When you start talking about that thing that men are supposed to receive, then all of a sudden it's an issue. Right. You know, it's a problem. Mm-hmm. You know, feminism is a first world problem. Yes. Right? It's a first world kind of thing. And all of the havoc that it's raging in our relationships and everything else, one of the reasons why, if you go to a place like Brazil, it's because, and you can have success, you know, finding with abundance a certain kind of woman, is because that feminism isn't there. But it's also because it's not a first world, right? So it seems that what part of the calculus is, as men have designed the world to operate with a certain level of efficiency, what ends up happening is we're working ourselves out of a job, so to speak, maybe, and it's not a job we don't want to work ourselves out of. You know, women are convinced that women think that, you know, things are so smooth and they work so well that we're not necessary. Men aren't necessary. We you know, why do I need a man? Hey, I can just, you know, call the plumber, and I can do this and I can do that and whatever else. You know, I don't need a man to own a house. I don't need a man to, you know, to drive my car back and forth to work. I don't need a man to do X, Y, and Z. Well, you're taking advantage of all these inventions that men designed and in infrastructure that men developed and that men are currently running. And the thing is that in societies that there's more poverty, and in societies where there's not as easy access to technology, then it's like it's more apparent that men are actually necessary. And that's one of the sort of that's a problem to try to solve. I don't know if that problem can be solved.
Go ahead, brother. No, I was going to say, you know, to your point, that is true. But there's another thing about needing, because yes, they need you, but you need them too. That's that contract. But at the same time, they still value you, even with all the technology and all the other things that they have. And I tell people, I'm like, yeah, you say a third world country, but they got iPhones, they got iPads, and we're talking about in the favelas. Yeah. We're not talking about just the rich. So, but they still want to be wise.
But they have to be. But there has to be a reason, though. I do think that if you're, you know, top 1% income for someone that's, you know, for a woman that's in Brazil, then that's automatically is going to make you more attractive. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing at all. But I'm also saying that I wonder how long it's going to be until that dynamic is not there anymore. Because again, feminism has sort of fully infiltrated even Brazil. And you
Oh, it's
said
there.
yourself that they're well, it's there. You said, but they're kind of like they're like in the 60s compared to where we are now. So
Right.
let's say let's fast forward 60 years. Do you still think it's going to be the same kind of dynamic?
No,
That's what I'm saying.
because when we came through the civil rights movement, it was a different time. We weren't as connected as we are then, as we are now. See, they're
Right.
coming through their blackness. They're starting to acknowledge that there's difference because they've been told, well, we're Brazilians, we're all the same, but we're still seeing a difference in treatment versus the white Brazilians and the brown or black Brazilians. So they're coming in at an age a little bit later, but the outcome is going to be different because they're starting to embrace it, but they still want to be wives. They still want to be family,
Right.
because the nuclear family is still intact. Even if you in a 1% woman in Brazil making money, you still have a nuclear family that they have been socialized to look for. And I'm gonna tell you something.
So what I'm asking is what is different about Brazilian society, Brazilian culture, than American culture? Because at one point in time, American culture used to value the nuclear family and everything else, but that value was it seems that was too easy to it was too easy to replace that with something else.
Well, me personally, they never had a Moynihan report type event that happened to them because Brazilians were in slavery longer than us. But they also, the treatment that they received from their slave masters was entirely different than us too. If you start going back into the culture, you start finding out that their slavery was different. Yes, they were still oppressed, but it was a different type of slavery versus the slavery that we had in the States. So all of that is cultural. And then, like I said before, they still are connected. We are very individualized. We've been broken apart. They never had this campaign about men are bad. We don't need men, blah, 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 and all the other rhetoric. And that feminism, they try it, but for them, feminism is the opportunity to work and make money. So when I had a conversation with one of the locals, I gave her a quick breakdown. I said, okay, you want to be a feminist? She said, yeah. I said, well, then you pay for your food, you pay for your Uber, you pay for this and you pay for that, and I pay for mine. And she looked at me and she said, is that what feminism is? I said, yes, and you don't need me. So she had an epiphany. To her, feminism is, I want to be able to work and make money. I want to have the opportunity. But when I told her what it underlines and what effects it could have, she said, I can't do that. She said, because I grew up with a mother and a father. I have aunts and uncles. I'm not going to say I don't need men. I just want to have the ability to work and earn money so that I can help my family. But that's their feminism. So I think just based on the people that I've talked to, they still want to be wives. And there's consequences. See, in the States, there are no consequences for your actions and foolery. Down there, you have one kid, it's a wrap.
Right.
You're going to see, you're going to see yourself in a position where you're destitute for forever, and you may have to end up doing a little something strange for a piece of change, because those are the consequences of you carrying on a certain way.
I'll tell you guys this: if you look at some of the data coming out of New York and even LA, it's getting to that point.
Yes,
getting to that point. They're having sex in the streets, at the stoplights, in broad daylight. And the reason for that is that there are, the state already knows they can't provide a certain number of jobs, so they're allowing prostitution to go on, and it's getting there. But there was something else I wanted to respond to earlier when you guys were talking about, how in the U.S., we're not really seeing women reach a point where they can see the need for men. But one of the things we've seen in the last year with this pandemic is that they are finding out, and this is why that whole notion of winter is coming is that much more powerful, because and again, I got to go back to Kevin Samuels, because he made an interesting observation last year when everything started, remember when everybody was fighting over toilet tissue?
Yes.
And everybody was trying to get what he pointed out something that I even witnessed myself. When you walk through these grocery stores, you saw Black women alone.
Right.
By themselves.
When you saw every other group, you saw them with their men. You saw them with their family. And he made an interesting point. He said this was the beginning point where women started to look around and say, okay, maybe I need a man more than I thought. You don't get a Kevin Samuels with 1 million subscribers on YouTube without a pandemic. Kevin will tell you that.
Right.
Kevin will tell you that. The pandemic is because really what it was women were finally willing to say, okay, I can see the value of a man. What do I got to do to get one? And listening to Kevin let them know, oh, we don't understand.
You qualify.
Well, not only that, we don't even understand men. Right. They've had to listen to men. They've not had to listen to what we want. Because one of the imperatives we were taught in our culture was that, they're the prize. They set the price, and men will kill themselves rolling over backward to be with them. Once they began to find they needed Black men, listening to Kevin, they found out just how wide that gulf is between us and what needs to happen in order for them to be competitive.
Right. I want to thank Michael Green. Thank you, Michael Green, for donating to the show. Guys, once again, get the likes up. Please subscribe to Dr. THasan Johnson's channel, Dr.Thunder, and help me get this channel to 1,000 subscribers as I'm trying to grow this brand. I'm trying to help as many men as I can. As Brother Eric Spencer said, we're going to lead one man at a time to the promised land. Now, listen, I'm going to be doing non-diagnostic consultations. If you're in need of consultation as it relates to whatever you're dealing with, please come to my email and email me at kosherclinician@gmail.com. I'm a licensed clinical therapist. My background is very, very extensive. Law enforcement. I was a special ed teacher, and now I'm a clinical therapist. So I got the tools to heal your mind. Now, listen, I want to ask you guys a question, especially you, Dr. THasan Johnson, from a scholarly perspective. It's a loaded question. How did we get here, and are American women wife ready? It's a loaded question. How did we get to this point, and are American women wife ready? And then, Eric, you're going to pick it back on, and then also Dr. Thunder, from the biblical context, what does it mean for a woman to be a wife? But go ahead, brother.
Well, I've been pointing out policy-wise and historically how we got here. I mean, the African-American community is unique, but at the same time, there are problems that we've had that have been really exacerbated by the political events, the economic events of the last 50 to 60 years, most especially, that have kind of brought us to this place where in the African-American community, we have a gynocracy where women are, for the most part, the heads of family. And at the end of the day, men have been seen as expendable. And all of that is kind of coming into question the more the state's ability to provide this, kind of floor for Black women that they don't provide for Black men is coming under question. Right. So we're seeing these things kind of beginning to break apart. And as far as this whole question of whether or not American women are wives, they haven't had to be.
Right.
Really, since right after World War II. They really haven't had to be. You might stretch it up to the early 60s to some extent. But by the time you get to the sexual revolution, the whole notion of being a wife is considered passé. It's considered out of the discussion. Cooperation is considered a dirty word. We ain't even started with this whole issue of submission, whether it's biblically based or not. All of those things are off the table. So then by the time you start to return to this question of what a marriage is, to many of the women socialized in the West, a marriage is having a man provide everything she wants, and she will decide what to extend to him at her whim. And she may take it back at her whim. This is the idea of marriage. It is a very cherry-picked traditionalism that is about what she feels like extending, when she feels like extending it, but the obligations men have to be concrete, right? So that's the dynamic. And when men are exposed to women who are not raised in that framework, even if they're African American women, but they don't come out of that framework, the competition level goes up because men are going to find that that's the whole different discussion. I have a good colleague of mine who's in one of those such relationships, but he's experienced a sort of what I call a relationship PTSD, right? Where he's been in these relationships with these particular kinds of women we've been talking about for so long, that being with a woman that actually is effeminate, is concerned and prioritizes him. He went through a whole 5-year period of trying to adapt to that. So he would call me and he'd say, I'm sitting here, I'm reading a book, and I look down and there's a glass of juice. And I look down, there's a cup of tea. And I looked down, there's a sandwich. He was like, what is she doing? Why? Frustrated, like, what is she trying to do to me? And I'm like, brother, calm down. That's how she shows affection. And he was like, are you serious? Like, but meanwhile, I know full well I've just gotten off the phone with him and I'm arguing over getting a glass of water. You know what I mean? So when you're in an experience like that, and I can tell you that was 5 years ago, and I just spoke to him yesterday. When I tell you this man wears a permanent smile, right? A permanent smile. There's nothing you can say to him about what he's doing, because he is actually happy. That is something that most Black men can't say they've experienced. And if that experience becomes more and more available to them, yeah, it's going to be a rough road.
So Eric, did you get the question? And then Dr. Thunder, I want you to more or less convey it to the audience through the biblical lens. What makes a woman wife ready? So Eric, has simping caused entitlement in the American woman? And then your best estimate with this loaded question, are American women wife ready?
So I want to dovetail on what Professor Johnson said. Policies were enacted, but there's another component of it, the socialization through the music, through the media, through the articles and stuff. Yeah. Because James was on Good Times, and James was everybody's father. You could get that ass whooped, but James also went to bat for you, and he was a provider, and he did the best that he could. Mm-hmm. And you had George Jefferson, who was successful. He made it up out of the ghetto, and Sanford and Son, and all those positive male role models. So they took those out, and they started saying Black men are bad. Black men are this. You have The Color Purple. You have Stella Got Her Groove Back. You have all those movies. Two Can Play That Game, where they pitted Black men and Black women against each other. And then if you look at the music, Black men were professing their love. They had Keith Sweat, Luther Vandross, and all these other songs. But when you looked on the flip side of it, you listen to the lyrics of the women, they were talking about, well, you need to do this. Sherelle, you want to take me out, but yet you knew you weren't interested in him, but I still wanted to use you as a dinner whore and have fun. That's what she's talking about. So when you really go back and start listening to the lyrics,
Saturday Love.
Yeah, you're listening to men pledge their love and affection through these songs, and men, they listen to that. R. Kelly's and Guy, Luther Vandross, men are singing those songs.
Right. Yeah.
But Mary J. Blige, all I want to do is be happy without you.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? No Scrubs.
Mm-hmm.
All these songs continued, and then the infamous Bay and the Beehive and all that other stuff. The songs were always adversarial. Our movies are adversarial. Yeah. The literature is adversarial. And with Black men not having a voice to be able to speak back against that, allowed them to continue this narrative, which programmed men to think, well, I have to be a better man because I heard it in this song, or I saw it in this movie, or I read about it in this article, this Jet magazine or Essence, that I need to be a good man. I don't want to be those men that these women talk bad about. Fast forward to now, we find out that's not what you wanted at all. What you wanted were the dudes that you have been having babies by. We know that you have been lying to us. We know that the music and the media and all the other things have been lying to us. And at the same time, they have been making you unwifeable because you can't bring peace to your man. You're not nurturing. You don't know how to nurture. You don't know how to be a wife. You don't know how to be able to go through the struggle and stick together because you haven't been taught, and you come from an environment where men are not being seen and or respected. So now here we are, you got a crop of men that don't know how to be men, and you got a crop of women that aren't marriageable because they don't know how to be married. They don't know how to be a wife. And I'm just gonna say one more thing, and I'm gonna get off. And Seven knows this story. My father passed away in December of last year, but my parents were married for 51 years. My father passed away. He had ALS from the Vietnam War. I saw my mother take care of my father up until his last breath.
Wow. Wow.
Women would not do that. They're not going to stick around.
Yeah.
They're not going to do that because they don't feel like they have to. They don't think they're worth it. They think they're better than, well, you're sick, you're on your own. I'm out because I got other options.
Right.
So my point is, for you to be a wife through thick and thin. Yeah. Now we've seen with the divorce rate and most of that being initiated by women, they're not in it through thick and thin. If it gets thick, then they're out. So no, you're not wifeable.
Yeah. Oh, that's
yeah, 80%. Yeah, 80% is of divorces in Black community are initiated by women.
So let me ask you a question as you're gonna break this down. You know, people assume that, or some women assume just because they are women that they are wife material.
Right.
And so in the edicts of theology, it says he that finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from God. But listen to this. A wife, likewise of old, and from patriarchal cultures, they were wife ready, meaning they were conditioned and trained to serve their husbands as the men were conditioned to serve and to protect their women. But I want you to break it down from the lens of theology. Why aren't American women wife ready and has the ship passed to the point that we can never repair it again?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to get any better. I wish I could say I think it's going to get better. I mean, when the institutions that should be calling women out for the stuff that they're doing that is not appropriate. It's ruining it for themselves. And it's promoting broken homes. I mean, it's doing all this negative stuff to our communities, and the institutions, the churches, are not from the pulpit speaking to this frequently. they're not doing that. You know, at least it seems to me that a wife would be able to, stay committed, stay in something. When 80% are splitting, I mean, you were talking about your father, and having ALS, and your mother taking care of him to the end. Yeah, like you said, women ain't going to do that.
Nope.
I mean, I'll tell you this. And I do, I do believe that I've been fortunate to find someone that is like my wife, that is, like I said, fit, feminine, friendly, cooperative, submissive. She didn't have any kids before we got married. I do. That's like a diamond in the rough. A needle in a haystack. All of that. If I wasn't married now, I would not take a chance on getting married.
Not in this culture.
I would not take a chance on getting married because it's too much. I mean, there is too little evidence.
Yeah.
That I mean, I don't know, other than how Kevin Samuels frequently talks about, like, he'll get someone that says, okay, well, I'm a virgin, or I'm a born again virgin, or whatever, woman, and she says, well, are you cooperating with the minister at your church, or X, Y, and Z? He goes into that. Unless you're willing to do it that way, I don't know. I don't know what the approach is supposed to be. So it just seems like a bad deal.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard for me to see it as anything other than a bad deal until I start to see en masse the way that women talk about relationships and the way they behave in relationships to totally flip and be a different thing. It doesn't seem that men should still go into these situations with the same willingness to give all that men have given in the past. in relationships. It doesn't seem to be a fair deal.
Go ahead, Dr. Johnson. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, well, one of the things I was going to say is there is an opportunity right now for a lot to change. But here's the thing. It really rests in the women's court, because the necessity is on the table. You know, they're seeing the value of men, some of whom for the first time in their lives. But at the end of the day, it's going to fall upon them and whether or not they're ready to acclimate to a standard that they've never been taught. And all the evidence, in my opinion, suggests that that's not something that they're really going to be able to do. They're not primed for it. They haven't been raised or socialized in an environment that supports it. I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about a culture where femininity by the women is viewed as weakness.
Right.
Women who advocate for femininity are often attacked by other women in social media, in families. I have people that contact me from family events, reunions, from Christmases and Thanksgivings, and they talk about the ways in which even women who advocate for femininity are attacked by the other women in the culture. So we don't really see a culture for that. And I'll give you an example of what I see as one of the other main issues that impacts this. I teach undergrad. So the age group of the students I deal with are roughly 17 to mid 20s, right? Every time I teach my black male class, I ask the students, I ask the women, I ask the men, how many of you are told that you need to make six figures to be worthy of a woman's time?
Wow.
Not only have I not had one male not have his hand raised, they're being told they need to make six figures at 17 to be worthy of the girl sitting next to them in class.
Right.
Who comes from the same neighborhood, the same kinds of family structures, the same kind of dysfunction, the same type of access of capital, access to resources. We come out of the same situations, but men have to make six figures at 17 years old. And the reality is, for black men that do make it, we don't generally do that until our 40s. It just takes time to develop that, especially when you come from a community with no resources.
Right.
The standard is so unrealistic.
Right.
Our young men are shamed and dismissed before they even get out the gate. And these are the ones that made it into college, and they're told that they're not worthy. So what happens to the brothers that haven't gone?
Well, listen, I got something, Doc, that's going to parrot that. I know Kay Sammons always talks about, people say, well, men should pay all the bills. And I'm going to say this, and some going to disagree with it, but it's okay. I stand firm in my convictions. What Eric Spencer's father got back in 1950s was a virgin. What Eric Spencer's father got back in the past was a woman that was that was ready to cook and teach and more or less serve her man. But you got women now that got kids by different men that have had a lot of fun, but they expect men to pay all the bills. I would never do that. My point is I got standards, and I think every man should have standards. And my whole point is the things that men accept now, men would never accept back in the past. Most women coming to the past, if she had a child, because I came out of high school back in 1990, we would look down on them. We didn't even look at them. Women that had high body counts were pariahs in the community. Most men said you had to be a virgin though if you want to be my wife back in the past. But I want you to talk about how the sexual liberation movement, Dr.THasan Johnson, has caused this chasm that you see now, because I don't believe a man should pay all the bills for women that are unsavory. I believe women that are worthy of it should get all bills paid. But just because she say I'm a woman, I should get all bills. I'm like, hell no, you don't get all your bills paid. I'm gonna do this thing based on a tier system. What does that facts look like? And then we're gonna start trickling it down. But break it down. How did the liberation movement cause this crap that we're having that book?
I think one of the things that it did is it told women in a very mistaken and unrealistic way that simply because they were women, simply because they had vaginas, that men would sacrifice all they had or should do so because they exist. And this is really a misunderstanding of this Victorian femininity that comes out of the West, right? This idea that women are inherently pure, inherently good, they're the mothers of the, these kind of Western narratives are what they're kind of building on. But it's been done in a very problematic way where the idea is because you're a woman, you're owed these things, and there's no kind of sensibility that there needs to be an exchange of resources, which is what that always was. But the male receiving component of it has been eliminated. Now you raised an interesting statement about what a woman deserves. Look, I had no problem paying all the bills. I had no problem taking care of a woman. My problem at the time I was doing this was, I got married 20 years ago, 21 years ago. The problem I had is I slowly found out that none of that was being reciprocated.
Boom.
And this, now, mind you, this is not even coming from a feminist who fundamentally believes I shouldn't get it. This is coming from a woman that was raised by her grandmother and was really coming to the table with some kind of desire to be a wife, but she didn't know how to be. And this is what I'm getting at. She didn't know how to be. There was no one to really teach her how to be. She'd never seen a functional relationship. So the beliefs she took in, or from what the brother was speaking about earlier, from movies and love songs and all those things, told her that I need to provide her with all of these things and that all she needed to do was exist. Now, the other thing I'd add to that is she also had sickle cell. So I actually took care of her until her dying day. And what I found out after that, now it was about 11 years ago, what I found out after that is that type of femininity I was joking with you about and telling you my friend's story, I've never run into it. I've never seen it. So, in terms of someone being willing to take care of you, not because they're a slave, but because they care for you. We've not really come out of a culture where that's been fostered. So even when you're talking about black men earning six figures who are supposedly high value men, they're not being treated any different. By American
I totally agree. I totally agree, brother. Right.
They're being told that you get an interview if you make six figures. See, we were taught in the 80s that if you made six figures, you were over 6 feet tall, you had a six pack, you had all these kind of things, and it's, the number of inches in your pants. If you had all of those things, you would be treated well. And what men found when they finally reached that point, the small collective that do, is that it wasn't that you were treated any differently. It just meant that you got an interview, but you weren't inherently treated differently. And I think this is one of the things that's been feeding the movements that you brothers are talking about. Because I've had friends who've gone down, married Brazilian, and come back as early as 1998. And I'm having these, and I'm still friends with them. This has started because men were told that we would be treated with respect if we earned out in the world. See, a woman doesn't have to go out earn out in the world. She just needs to become. She wakes up one day and she can reproduce. She doesn't even have to work out. If she's young, she's beautiful. It just she grows into it. Men have to go out and conquer the world. And the problem is even when men can conquer the world, and black men have been set at a disadvantage from doing so more than any other group, except maybe Native American men. But even when we do, the goalpost gets moved and you're still treated like nothing.
Yeah. So, oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Well, before Dr. Thunder go, let me ask you a question. K-Sam is actually advocates getting married. In your mind, do you think a man should marry a Western woman? I would say no. But with the laws that are here now, what's your take on that? Should men be concerned about getting married to women in this culture? Or what's your take on that?
Well, I think a lot of people misconstrue what Kevin is saying. Kevin is saying for us a distinct population of elite business corporate men where marriage complements their work, that those men are looking for wives, because that's why his target audience is high value men. He's not saying everybody should get married. He's saying for that select elite group of men who need marriage. I mean, think about it. Think about being a politician without a wife. Or trying to be a CEO. It's not that it's impossible, but it's harder to climb those ranks without certain things in place. There's certain, kind of cultural practices in business where it's looked at like something may be wrong with you if you don't have a wife. It's very much a business, and that's how he talks about marriage. He talks about marriage more as a business in that regard. But I think to the average, black male who's earning, the median, I think, is around 41,000. That would be detrimental. It would be a huge mistake for the very reasons Dr. Thunder pointed out, because we're not really primed for that. We're not protected from it. And the state, more often than not, will kind of lend its resources to a woman. So, you might find yourself, and there are women that do this, that get married, have children, get child support, move on to the next one and do it again, wash, rinse, repeat. And you end up providing, you and two other guys providing for her reality. And I've witnessed this. I've dated some of these women where her reality is really supplemented by a variety of men she's been with, none of whom were able to protect themselves from the negative cost of marriage in the family court system. So I would say that black men more than anybody, but Western men in general, definitely have to be extremely careful. I think we have to learn how to vet women, which we've never learned how to do. We've not learned our worth and our value because we were not told we had any. We were told what women value, that women were naturally valuable because they existed, but men were never taught what our value was. Right. This is one of the things that Kevin's movement was, and he's really the tip of the spear. This has been going on long before.
Right, exactly.
And he would admit that. But when you talk about SMV, sexual marketplace value, we didn't learn these things in the 80s, in the 70s, and the 80s, and the 90s. We were not told when we had value. All we were told is meet that checklist I talked about of income and looks, and you'll be treated well, and it didn't happen. So once we started to learn about our value in the marketplace, it started to change the game. And, but going back to your question about marriage, I would say only in very minute situations, and you better have your ducks in a row and realize that even prenup agreements at this point are not ironclad.
Right, especially from your state of California. But let's make the argument, Dr. Johnson, and then Dr. Thunder, I want you to come in. But let's look at Dr. Dre. Dr. Dre got smiggled into marriage. He's paying out of the wazoo. Jeff Bezos got smiggled because, as I said once again earlier, women come in, a lot of them, Western women come into marriage being practical, men come into marriage being romantic. And so they both got smiggled. They're billionaires. So how do you counter that?
Well, I mean, again, when you really look at their worth, they're in a whole different strata. I mean, Bezos actually made more money than he ever did after he divorced her. Dr. Dre, one could argue, to us, 3.6 is a lot. For him, it actually might have been a break, considering what could have happened. I would have told him to be careful about marrying. I think she was a lawyer in the first place or something.
Yes.
She's a lawyer.
I don't know why you did that one, player. You just walked.
He got mesmerized by the booty. That's what.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And he walked into a wood chipper.
I'm telling you, that simping gene, that's strong.
We have got to learn to read the flags, man. I remember I had a situation once where I had a woman visiting me for the weekend, and I came out into my living room, and she was on the couch talking to her lawyer, trying to figure out what else she could get out of her ex-husband. And it went off in my head, like, what's to prevent this from being me in a year or two that she's talking about? You know what I mean? That's the culture we're in. And if you and think about this, if you upset a woman or you hurt her or you just don't meet her expectations, even though she's already been raised with a clear understanding of what she can do to you, what will her girlfriends tell her when she's upset about what her options are?
Oh, they're going to aid in that. They're going to help. They're going to form up like Voltron, and buddy, they're going to pull out the sword and they're going to let you have it.
Exactly. And there's been such a legacy of that most men kind of know it, but we don't accept it. And much of the time we're trying to live in that velvet painting. But I'm trying to tell brothers, man, look, put that painting to the side, deal with the realities of life, the woman in front of you and the circumstances that surround her and you, and really come to a logical decision, because you don't want to spend 18 years trying to pay for something that you should have been able to see, or hopefully you might have been able to see the flags for if you knew how to vet properly.
Thank you, Brother Stephen Brown, for that donation. No. Dr. Thunder, go ahead, brother. Go ahead, brother. Go ahead.
Yeah, now we have been assuming this to be the case, but we haven't specifically mentioned this.
Right.
And that is just the effect that social media has had on this whole dynamic. It's sped everything up. It's multiplied the effects of everything. I mean, it used to be that rather than having to go to Brazil, you could go to some small town, some American small town, right? And you could find, I don't know, maybe you could find a 7 or an 8. She hadn't been ran through. She was, she had traditional values, and okay, you could make a go of it. But now, if you go to whatever small town, you think it's isolated, you think nobody knows anybody there, that same girl has 150,000 followers on Instagram.
Right.
Facts.
Right. And
Facts.
so that totally changes the calculus. It totally changes all of the dynamics. I mean, one thing that I have heard Kevin frequently say is he actually thinks that if you're going to get married, he actually thinks that he thinks that struggle love is the way to go. That if you're both young and you're committed to the development and you work on it over time, he's actually a fan of that. But he knows that women are not going to buy that. They're not going to try to do that. So what the women naturally are going to do, the 20 somethings, the 22, the 23, they're going to be looking for these guys that already have the bag. And disproportionately, they are going to be older, right? And so it already sets up that sort of dynamic. And some of that is natural because it does take guys longer to get their stuff together. But the point is that what's screwing up the whole thing is these ridiculous expectations that women have and the access that they have, even if it's just for a fling, even if it's just to get flued out just for, for a weekend, whatever it is, the access or the appearance of the access, and then of course you have that whole validation by likes and all of that whole kind of thing.
Yeah.
It used to, and I remember my dad telling me, begging, you never want to be begging a woman. The thing is that if you get a woman by begging, that means that that's going to be your existence in that relationship.
Right.
And it's almost unfair for you to change that because she is entering the agreement based on this is the baseline. You're going to be begging. Mm-hmm. Okay. This is what it is. You beg me for everything. So as soon as you change, you say, you know what? I'm not begging you anymore. She's going to be out the door, right? She's not going to wait around. She's going to be done. But that whole begging thing, and you hear it in the music. I'm going to do an episode of Thunder's Thoughts where I take apart some of the lyrics to a lot of these R&B songs, these love songs, crooners singing, begging for a woman's attention, simping hard. What's the name of that tune, Joe? By Joe. All the things your man won't do for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. See, that's an issue. But that some of that is kind of the infancy of it. But if you give them all of this free attention, and that sounds like, it almost sounds punitive. Like I'm trying to suggest that we shouldn't give them attention. Mm-hmm. Like we should use that as some sort of manipulation. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying right now, what we have now is the result of all of this undue attention, getting all this attention and adulation by everybody all the time. You can't even say anything negative. You're not even allowed to say anything negative. Body positivity. If you're overweight as a guy, you're just a fat guy.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
There ain't no body positivity for men, right? But it's just, yeah. So, yeah.
It's interesting to see the wall though that's kind of come about. Like when you think about attention and social media, I think the culmination of all of that was OnlyFans, and because OnlyFans meant that women could take that attention and translate it into dollars. But then what happened a few weeks ago with OnlyFans? They cut all of that off. And this is why you're starting to see even more of this tension. What are they calling it online? People are getting the "Hey, big head" texts. Mm-hmm. I have.
Well, hold up. I think they announced that they were going to do that, but have they actually pulled the trigger on that yet?
I don't know if they pulled the trigger, but the fact that they're doing it because they have a deal in the works that requires a family-friendly face, and it's worth cutting off all of that.
Right, over $1 billion evaluation, something like that.
Exactly.
So Myron Game.
Hold on. They're incentivized. Okay, they're incentivized to cut it. But I'm simply saying that at the end of the day, what we're seeing is a shift that's impacting women in a way that they never even thought it would impact them. And I wanted to just quickly add, just as a minor thing, unless you're going to go out of the country and be able to have a whole new reality, I would urge every man, especially when you're young, to actually get comfortable with being alone. I'm not saying you should continue to live that way. I'm not saying that that's the best life to live until you die, but I'm saying that men should learn. And I'm saying this as a Gen X man that grew up off of all that music we're talking about. We especially have to learn how to step back from that culture and live alone. Be actually able to appreciate your own space and then go out and deal with other folks. Because if you can do that, you're not coming from a place of desperation and hoping somebody will spend time with you or whatever, because you know you can be content on your own. But men who grew up in this culture that the four of us are talking about most especially need that reorientation, because without it, we're chasing after one woman after another, because we were taught from birth that happiness was a woman's approval.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think for the most part, a lot of American men are still operating on the 1940s and 50s hard drive, where we're still conservative or more or less pigeonholed to be traditional and be providers, while women are more or less conditioned to be modern. That's why I say when you look at the material on the thumbnail, men, the lords of the rings, actually the men are blue, but the ring is actually red, and Smeagol is looking at the ring. And so a lot of men have been Smeagoled, and they don't come to their epiphany until once they find out the baby that they have is not theirs, or the woman say, I no longer love you. Dr. THasan Johnson, if you got married again, to the young men listening, based on what you've been through, your schema affliction, what would you look for in a wife? And then Eric, I want you to tell the audience what you are looking for in your next wife. I mean, not next wife, in your future wife as well. I know. I was about to get my ass. But go ahead.
I think Eric is probably primed to answer that question better than I ever could. But I would say for me, at the age I'm at and the life experience I've had, growing up believing that I needed to be the knight on the shining horse, I needed to sacrifice, I needed to make her to, be at peace. The place I'm at now is purely simple. It's two things. It's cooperation, and what undergirds that more than anything is peace. You understand something? My house is peace. Right. When I wake up in the morning, when I go to bed at night, my reality is peace. If she can't bring or add to that peace, it's not even open for discussion. And this is the last time I'm bring up Kevin's name, but there's something he does in every phone call that is incredibly interesting if you pay attention to it. He will jab here and there. He'll cut women off. He'll make little statements here and there. He'll ask questions in the middle of sentences. But if you caught him, he'll tell you, I do it on purpose. Because if she can't handle a conversation, if she gets adversarial and argumentative in the course of a conversation, what happens if you try to build a life with her? So all that to say, for me at this point in my life, it is about peace. It is about contentment. I got a 16-year-old son that is getting ready to leave for college soon. I'm about to transition into a whole different phase of life. And it's, to me, if it ain't bringing peace, I don't got time for it.
Yes, sir. I totally agree. And I think it happens, man, as you get older. I'll be 50 years old this year. I still got that velvet swag, but I'll be 50 years old this year, man. Half of my life is over, man. And I concur with you 100%. If it ain't about peace, you can't be in my life, because I'm going to tell you something, man. One of the greatest things to the health of a man, because I tell men that there are 7 steps of a man that a man must go through in order to become an optimized male. And that's family, faith, finances, female psychology. What is it? Politics, world travel, and also health. And so as you get my age, if you don't have those 7 core elements, you don't become an optimized male. And my slogan is, if it ain't 7, it ain't kosher. If it ain't kosher, it's not right. And so for me to be optimized as a man transitioning to the latter years of my life, I got to be trying to master those 7 elements. And I agree with you 100%. It just seems like once you hit that late 40s, mid 50s, you don't care how big her butt is. You don't care how good she looks. You don't care. Your meat won't even get hard if she's disrespectful. You just say, look, I'm good. I don't know what it is. It's like, I don't know if it's testosterone levels drop.
Now, speak for yourself.
Go ahead.
Now, I'm trying to be like Mr. Ronald Isley. Right. As you know, Mr. Isley is in his 70s and his wife is in her early 40s.
Right.
He met her when he was in his 60s and she went in her 20s. I think 27 or 28 to be precise. And they've been together for a long time. And Lionel Richie has done the same thing. So if you're with the right person that can bring you peace and give you a peace, man, that's all the peace you're gonna need. And I'm telling you right now, once you get outside of the matrix,
yes,
you can get a whole bunch of peace.
Right,
Pieces.
right.
And you know, I mean, I'm not against women here in the States, but just to listen to them and listen to what they want. There's a list of things. Okay, I see your list. Now, this is what I want. And like you said, they're not used to having that. You're not supposed to have standards.
Right.
And see, for me, you know, I have standards. Right. And if you don't qualify, you just don't qualify.
Just don't qualify, right.
And they don't like no. They don't like no.
Yeah.
When you say you got to be fit, it's like, well, I don't want to go to the gym. Sweetheart, I'm 48. I'm still counting calories and going to the gym. So if I can do it at 48, your ass can do it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Cooperative. Let's work together. Keep other women out of our business. What going in this house, stay in this house. If virtual likes get you on, then you need to go put that phone in the bed and sleep with those likes. Yep. Because your attention needs to be focused on me and what I'm doing. Right. And I'm going to be focused on bettering the family so that we're all going to prosper.
Right.
But if you think these virtual likes is going to get you through the night, then I need to get out of our bed and I need to go find somebody else's bed to get in. Right. See, men need to start talking like this, because being nice, going Q sweat, and all this other stuff, that doesn't work. Right. What works is telling them, I'm not putting up with this. These are my standards. Be fit, be feminine, cook food, fornicate, and be friendly. That's it. And that's not really that hard, because I can get that. And what that does is it inspires you, it energizes you to do more, to be more. I'm not dependent on her validation, but it's like me getting that jump start. And I'm telling you, it's a reason why brothers, when they come back from Brazil, they get emotional.
Right.
Because they haven't experienced that femininity. And when they get back into the matrix and they start being in this toxic environment, they realize, wow, that is what I have been missing my whole entire life.
Yeah.
And they go into a huge depression. They really do.
But don't take Dr. Johnson, because he might start crying. He's gonna be singing that song about
it's
so hard to say goodbye to yesterday. But we're gonna guide his hand. We're gonna guide his hand when we take it. But
I was gonna say, brother Eric might find this interesting. Another question I always ask my students, male and female, is how many of you have met or been a man that has let a woman know what your standards are? So I asked the women, how many of you have met men that told you what their standards were and could give you a list the way y'all give them a list? And then I asked the men, how many of you have a list? So far in 5 years of asking that question, I've never once had a young man that had either had a standard or met a woman who said she met a man that had a standard. You understand what I'm saying? It's not something that we are taught to have. We're not taught that we can have it, let alone it should be on it. So I've not run across a young man yet that's actually had a standard.
Right.
And matter of fact, this is so true about men not being allowed to have these standards. When women have these long lists, that even these 5 that Kevin frequently speaks of, fit, feminine, friendly, cooperative, and submissive, which are not even, those shouldn't even really be standards. That should like be assumed. That stuff should almost be assumed. And even saying that stuff is offensive.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and at some point in time, you're just gonna have to realize I can't deal with this, because I'm asking for a little. I'm not asking for a lot. I'm asking for you to do normal things. And other races of other women are doing this. I go to the gym 4 days a week, and I'm telling you who's in the gym.
Yeah.
I was about to mention that.
Marisol, Maylin, they in the gym. And May Lynn down here getting a squat game on. Best believe that.
Well, let me ask you.
When you start making stir-fried pork chops, brother, it's a wrap.
Let me ask you a question, though. I'm just curious because I heard this from a brother, the same brother of mine I told you about, who's in an interracial relationship and he's happy and whatever. When he laid out his list, and this was the first time he ever had a list, and mind you, he was almost 50. He laid out his list to this woman at the time who he was dating, who he later married. The funny thing about it is, she said, this was her words in response to his list. She said, "Is that all?"
Wow.
Is that all? So my question to you is, when you're talking to women who are raised in a whole different context and you lay out your list, do they find it to be much of a demand, or is it kind of basic as far as their experience? In other words, do their men actually ask for much more?
Their men ask for much more.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny that you asked that, because their culture sustains a lot of that. Like, they get shamed if they're not married by 27. It's not 30. They get shamed. They also know and can see that the competition is fierce. So maintaining fitness and being feminine and being able to cook, those things, you really don't have to ask, because they already know I got to have this at a minimum before I can even come to the table.
Right.
They know that off the gate. So you saying, hey, I want you to work out, be friendly, feminine, and all the other things. And those are things they're going to do off the rip. So it's not like you have to give them a list, but in the back of your mind, you can say, I'm only going to deal with this, this, and this, and this. And the thing about it, in those cultures, there's consequences, because, hey, if you don't want to do it, sweetheart, she will.
That's right.
And they are very aggressive.
Right.
They are very aggressive. She's with you. That's your man. I'm going to take him right then and there. If you mess up, I'm going to take him. And that woman knows you're not leaving the house full. You're going to be empty.
You know, one thing I'm realizing that is sort of undergirding all of this, and that is oneism. And that is, and that, again, that's that whole romantic thing, that there's only one ideal person for each person. Right. And so if you fully buy into that, if you say, hey, there's only one person that's the ideal person for me, and I need to be gunning specifically for only that person, right? Then what happens is that you'll be more willing to deal with whatever mess that that offers. And if it's a bad deal, hey, well, it's the person for me. So, hey, the bad deal that's just part of it. That's just part of my journey. That's what my life is supposed to be, because this is the one person for me. There's a Netflix series. I can't remember. I think it's called The One or something like that. And it's an interesting series because they start off by kind of getting into that whole thing. And what they had done was they figured out at the genetic code who was going to be most compatible. And then you could be matched with, and the match was always only people that had submitted their genetic materials, but then they could match within a particular thing. And this one woman, she's married to a guy, they're in a good relationship, whatever. But she just kept gnawing at her. Is this really the guy though? Is he really going to think that I'm the person? So what she did is she actually got her husband matched. And then she went and met the girl and then created this really awkward situation. So then what ended up happening is the girl and the husband actually ended up together, but it was because she was doubting, his sincerity and all like this. So it was a really, actually very interesting kind of series. But my point is that that whole oneism thing, that kind of undergirds everything. What we're talking about, like, having options, that would mean that there would be potentially more than one person. And a guy would have to be willing to exercise those options, right? Otherwise, it's just, well, anyhow, it was just
I think it's one of those things where, we live in a culture that doesn't understand supply and demand. And I think the reality of our economic situation is demanding that people finally understand it. Black men, there are a couple million fewer of us as it is.
Right, 2 million, I think.
Exactly. So that being said, you already are in a situation where black men are in demand. And when you start going down the list in terms of, what you bring to the table, what you're doing with your life, so on and so forth, we find ourselves more and more in demand. But in our community, we're not treated like demand. We're treated like we're being done a favor.
Yes, sir.
Is a certain amount of attention. And this is why the environment that we're in is demanding that it is actually resetting the value system. And this is why Kevin exists, because it's resetting the value system based on what's real and not this prescribed illusory bullshit. And the other thing that's happening is, as you pointed out, is there's the international competition. These environmental forces are breaking up what the black community has been trying to sell for the last few decades to their own men, which is, you are lucky if a woman pays you any amount of attention. The environment is not allowing for that mess anymore. There's too much available, even for black men that are doing just a little something with their lives. It's too much available, and it's challenging a lot of this stuff so if you grew up under that Keith Sweat culture, there is a point where that we need to be able to let that go and actually let the world show you what your value is.
Right, and you're correct. Men are the true lords of the rings if they know what their value is. Like you were saying, Eric has seen it when he's in Brazil. Average men get gorgeous women. I mean, they're average guys. But we come in, the guys in America not only have one night, like Dr. Thunder was talking about, but we come in with a deficit mindset, thinking that we are less, which leads to what I call, once again, a schema affliction. A fixated mindset that I'm worthless, I'm useless, and then the affliction from the pain of the past of being imprinted by negative women that told them they weren't good enough. So we have been socialized and conditioned to be, like your famous patent term, concusseurs. We've been conditioned to be mules of society. Yes. We've been conditioned to be what I call the commodities of subjugation as it relates to her solipsism. Yeah. And because of that, as it relates to behavioral psychology, she comes in with the power, and you come in being at the bottom. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, and I was going to dovetail on what Professor Johnson was saying. It's like, look, black men are waking up. I'm a Gen Xer. I talk to hundreds of guys, and 7 would tell you this about things that are going on in their lives. And I just tell these guys over and over again, look, you have options. Mm-hmm. This is what Charles Tyler and his movement was about, and we have continued his legacy. It's not just about you going to Brazil. I've been to 28 countries and 40 states. So I've had a very worldly view. Mm-hmm. But when these guys come on these trips, and 7 would tell you, we're really more focused on introducing them to other options that they never thought they had. Yeah. And not options just to women, to culture, but also to brotherhood with like-minded brothers from different backgrounds, from multimillionaires to PhDs to HVAC guys and plumbers, truck drivers. Mm-hmm. We have that melting pot that you don't see in the States. You have black men from different backgrounds coming together and working together. It's like going through boot camp. And it's a wonderful thing, because now I have options. I have options for not just for women, but maybe business opportunities, or even to have somebody to talk to when I need to talk to somebody. I talked to a brother last night that was going through this same thing with these women. And I told him, I said, brother, you are killing yourself. Mm-hmm. Walk away, get your passport, and come on down in November. You don't have a frame of reference. Yeah. And a lot of brothers do not. And that's what we're here for. We can't save them all, but we call Brother Charles Harry Tubman. He gonna lead them to the promised land one leg at a time. And there are other brothers that are out here doing it too. You know, when Charles passed away, there was such a huge amount of people cheering in his death because he was giving brothers hope, and the opposition was happy that he was gone. But what you've done is you have awakened a sleeping giant. Now you have Black Man's Travels, you have Black Men's Travels, you have other brothers that are showing that, and plus the Black Man's Option. You have Coach Greaves with Frustrated 1 and 2 and 3 on the way. You can't stop the bum rush. That's just the easiest way to do it. And this is not being derogatory or negative or downing. These are facts. Brothers are taking their ball and they're going home.
Right.
No, but it's really just it's natural in a sense. Look, if I have a bag of diamonds and I keep telling people this is just a bag of rocks, I can treat it like that. But as soon as I take that bag of diamonds to the marketplace and I put it into the marketplace,
there it is.
It's going to be treated for what it's worth, regardless of what I tried to say it was worth. Once it's into the marketplace is going to decide its value, not what I say in my house about this bag. You know, and that's what's happening with Black men. Black men, and this is even within the U.S.
Yes.
Even within the U.S., there are other groups of women that are finding that Black men tend to rate the highest when it comes to being fairly progressive, fairly open, you know, manageable, workable, you know, all of these things, accommodating, yes. Absolutely. I mean, even in terms of, we can talk about it even in terms of sex. The way brothers have been socialized around sex, especially our generation. One of the things we prided ourselves in is how well we could perform in the bed, how long you could go, what you could do, what you could do to please her. Look at all the love songs we grew up listening to, right? Well, when you put that in the open market, even just that applies to you in a beneficial way. In other words, Black men are seen as being the most, kind of progressive, workable, manageable men who are accommodating in all kinds of ways. The point I'm getting at is our value, even within the confines of the U.S., is starting to change because other groups are starting to figure out what Black men bring to the table.
Right.
Changing everything.
Right. Doc, I want to ask you guys a question. Dr. Thunder, I want you guys to look at this real quick and tell me, is this the emasculation of the American man as it relates to being Smeagled in relationships? Hold tight.
So, am I still on the live, back? I mean, didn't you tell them to kind of keep it down and you go in there and bring it back up? I thought y'all was going outside. Are you going outside? Oh, you trying to make sure you get a good Father's Day gift? I don't understand. Is that why you being loud or? Bless your spirit. Go on outside. Play with your children for a little bit. Y'all see what I have to deal with? You back so soon? What's going on with you? Huh? Well, I love you, babe. I just was wondering what's going on. I'm just trying to do the live. So anywho, babe, you talking under your breath? What's going on, babe? Didn't you just say you was working on a good Father's Day gift? Talking under your breath, and I can hear on top of that. Wow. Don't do that, babe. Because my spirit don't like it. All right? You go outside, and when you come back in, you have it together, okay? You let the devil use you. You ain't did that in quite some time. You've been on your best behavior. Thank you.
That's what my mother used to.
Nope.
What is your interpretive analysis of that, Dr. Thunder and Dr. Johnson, Eric? What is your all's interpretive analysis of that? Because that's what I talk about, the smeagling of relationships. This woman, Cynthia Brown, was venerated as being an icon for retiring her husband. But based on what you guys see through critical inquiry, is that a classic form of emasculation in you all's opinion? And if so, why?
Yeah, this is what I have to say. That's what I have to say. Yeah. That's totally ridiculous. I mean, what is he her kid?
But you know what?
Like, no, man.
You know what's funny about that? Because she emasculated him, but she also referenced the Bible. So it's kind of like, I'm telling you to get in your place, and if you step out, then I'm going to give you the Holy Ghost is going to help put you back in. It just seemed like it was like a shuffling left and right, and you doing this and you doing that. But really, first off, I would have told her she can kiss the crack of my ass. See, that's the problem. You allow them to talk to you any kind of way.
That's true, right?
And they continue to do that. Right. She up here talking about the Lord this and the Lord that. You got
but let's take it back to that too, though, because again, that circles around an important issue here. Honestly, I don't think that. I think if you showed that in a church, in a black church, I think the few guys that were there, they would have an issue with it. But honestly, I don't know. I don't know how many of them would really have a serious issue with it. How many of the women and the people that are in leadership?
I don't think the women.
Think they would.
Yeah.
I don't think
they don't see anything wrong with it.
But you know, this is one of those things in the 90s when you had these relationship discussions. One of the things I used to hear a lot from women is, you know, can you handle a woman that makes more than you? You can't handle it. You're too insecure as a man, this kind of thing. I've been saying this for the longest. I don't think women can handle making more than their men. Because
that's the
I look at what you're talking about with this person, and I'm not familiar with her until recently.
Right. Cynthia Brown.
Retiring.
Tabitha Brown. I'm sorry.
Tabitha. I wasn't really familiar with her, but you know, I heard all of the applause that everybody gave, and I was like, okay, whatever. But my experience has been when women are in a position of dominance, or it's their behavior that shifts more than anything.
Yes.
And the way they tend to view men. Women will process men in two ways. They'll process you as a son or a mate. This is fundamentally how, as on an animal level, women function. You are either her son or her mate. It doesn't matter who you actually are in life.
Right.
You could be a 60-year-old man. You could be a 15-year-old boy. It doesn't matter. If you act as a boy, she will treat you like a son.
Right.
If you act as a man, she will treat you as a man. I've met 14-year-old boys that head their household because of how they act. That's how women process you.
That's true. I agree with that. That's true.
Can find yourself in a relationship where she is treating you like a son, and it is every bit about how you engage her. And so at the end of the day, my whole thing is, you know, and I tell young men, do not move into a woman's house.
Nope.
You know, and have your own space, have your own. Do not put yourself in a position of dependence, because at some point, that's how you're going to be treated on one level or another. And once she treats you that way, there's no respect.
None. And she's going to step out on you, and she's going to dare you to say something.
Absolutely.
And all that's going to do.
She'll leave you at home with the kids to do it.
Exactly. And all that does is just further the dysfunction and the psychic trauma. That's why get your passport. Well, you know what? I'm not even going to say that, because yes, I'm an advocate for that. But at the same time, the tides are changing, and you are right. Women outside of the race within the states are also seeing what's going on, and there also are more women than them, and they know that there aren't enough of their men to go around. So as black men become more, it's socially acceptable to date and marry a black man, then they're going to dip into that well. And like I said, Becky, Marsau, and Maylin, especially Marsau, because Marsau really does have the genetic background. You know, they just got off the boat a little bit earlier than we did. That's all. But really, and Marsau, trust me, she can cook the rice and beans, but she know how to cook them collard greens too. So you in trouble. That's really who the competition is. And like you said, they are not used to competing for the men here, and they're getting a wake-up call at the wrong time, because all the other circumstances going on in the environment are changing too fast for them to adapt. Whereas black men, we've already been adapting, because that's how we've been able to overcome. Right. We had to adapt. So it's in our second nature to say, okay, this is how we're going to do. We're going to pivot here. But them, they haven't had to pivot. They've been able to rock and roll with Black Girl Magic, Black Girl Rock, and You Go Girl, and the Beehive, and all this other stuff. Now you got COVID, bam. Now you got a shortage of black men, bam. Now you got the Black Manosphere speaking out, bam. Now you also have other women coming to poach the best of your men, bam. The men that you said that you didn't want or not worthy of your vajayjay, but somebody else is that look better than you and is more feminine than you and bringing more to the table and being more accommodating than you. And like I said, it's death by 1,000 cuts. And at this point, because they are so socially misandrous, they can't change.
Right.
They just can't. It's too ingrained in them from schooling, from the media and whatnot. But the problem is for them is that it doesn't matter what they feel. These are the facts. And the consequences are coming. And that all that culminates to what we've been talking about before, about the fat meat being greasy.
Right.
You don't believe that these things are going to happen. And when the winter comes, you're going to see. Because now you've alienated your men that you need in the Gen Xers. The millennials and the Zs and the As have been so socialized that they don't even deal with you anymore. They're just going straight out the door. So you in a segment of women that's by yourself and you have no allies. So what are you going to do? And as men, we're not looking to see their demise. But you know, when you did something back in the day, you got that ass whooping. Go ahead and get the bitch.
Hey, real quick, Dr. Thunder, then Dr. Johnson, they got to go. First of all, guys, thank you for coming on the panel. You guys have been awesome. I mean, dynamic. This has been a diverse and a power-packed panel. Go check out Dr. Thunder. Go check out Dr. THasan Johnson at the Honors Report. And Dr. Thunder, what's the name of your channel again, brother?
You just look for Dr. Thunder. Just spell out doctor.
Okay, all right.
Dr. Thunder, you'll find me.
So as we get ready to close down, guys, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's get this channel to 1,000 subscribers. If you need some non-diagnostic clinical consultation, email me at thekosherclinician.com. Also, cash out $7 smalls. I want to ask you this question as we're getting ready to sign off, as it's 27 minutes out the hour, 7 o'clock in my DJ voice. But listen, I want to ask you this question, Dr. Thunder. The scripture says that she will have a desire for her husband, but he will rule over her. And if Jesus Christ himself was walking on the planet, they will have a problem with him. What does that interpretation mean based on from the theological training?
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, Jesus could walk on water. I can't walk on water. So, I'm not going to have a shot. If they can find an issue with him, they're going to have an issue with everything. Okay. So, well, one thing about black men is that, and Dr. THasan Johnson was talking about this, we tend to be very, I think, accommodating. We're willing to listen to women, I think, at a greater degree. I mean, most of us were raised by single mothers, and so we're willing to listen to women. We're more flexible. We tend to be more flexible. So there's a lot of positive there. Also, this whole thing about what goes on in the bedroom, and especially Gen Xers, and how that became a real important part of what was going on in a relationship, and could be grounds for your dismissal if you weren't laying it down properly or whatever. But all that shows is that none of that stuff really matters. None of that stuff really matters. If women, if they're going to come to a situation for the right reasons, and because they have been given the proper tools to stay in that situation, then they will. And if they have not, then they won't. It seems like that's basically what we're stuck with. It doesn't seem to matter how much evolution or how, if you, all of the things that women say that they want from men, it doesn't matter how many of those things that you're able to satisfy. It doesn't matter if you're 10 out of 10 on whatever that list of requirements are. They're going to still find some kind of reason why you're not good enough. They're going to still find some kind of reason to satisfy whatever their temporary, whatever their temporary urges are, and go elsewhere. So, anyhow.
All right, Doc. I know you guys got to go real quick. I need to ask Eric this for Dr. Johnson. Two things. One thing, Dr. Johnson. What did you get out of this show? And then Eric, I want you to answer this question for Dr. Johnson. Is Dr. Johnson going to experience post-Brazilian depression? but Dr. Johnson, what did you get out of the show? We're about to sign off. And then, Eric, I want you to answer the question. But real quick, Doc, what did you get out of the show? We're going to get out of here, man. It's late.
Oh, man, I was introduced to yet another group of black men that I can learn plenty from and plan to learn more. So, I appreciate each of you.
No doubt. I appreciate you too, brother. Is Dr. Johnson going to experience post-Brazilian depression? What intervention?
Hell yeah.
Before we take him over there, man.
Look. I'm just going to say like this. I'm still counseling Dr. Neal. I talk to him from time to time, and I'm not going to tell his business, but it is what it is. Even him with the PhD, still having withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah.
So, but one thing we have a support group for that too. Well, so come on down.
He's a good friend of mine, so I've talked to him since he got back, and I can definitely say, but your point stands, man. And Dr. Thunder can understand this too. He can talk about it. You get your doctorate, you spend years doing so. At the fundamental level, you're still treated like you ain't shit.
Right.
Excuse my
fact. No, you're right. No, but you're 100% correct. You're 100% correct. Listen, guys. This has been a powerful show. We're leaving one brother at a time. I'm honored once again to have the venerable Dr. THasan Johnson and the venerable Dr. Thunder, and also Deacon Eric Spencer, because they don't believe that the fat meat is greasy. But they're gonna learn. They're gonna learn that the fat meat.
They're gonna learn today, baby.
They're gonna learn today the fat meat is greasy. Well, listen, guys, it's 32 minutes after the hour, 12 o'clock. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for coming on. We're about to sign off. Dr. Thunder, salute, brother. Salute, Dr. THasan Johnson. Eric, we're about to sign off. And guys, once again, if you like what we're doing, donate this. Donate $7 smalls. And for people like Dr. Johnson who get post-Brazilian depression, come into my inbox and go to Kosher Clinician at gmail.com. All right, guys, we're about to sign off because
peace.
We're about to sign off now. Hold tight. Let me get this thing. Hold on. Let me get this thing in. We're about to do it now.
4 in the morning, you got me up, all cause you need to talk. To 4 in the evening, wanna break up, say that you've had enough. I'm tired of talking, again and again, argue about everything. You are my darling, this kiss and make up, I know you wanna touch. You call me every night, call me every day, I just wanna get you alone now. Trust me when I say we gon' be...
All right, guys. All right. That's it. But Doctor, thanks again, brothers. I appreciate it, man. Thanks, Dr. Johnson. Appreciate it, brother.
I appreciate y'all having me. And do me a favor, send me that song when you get a chance.
Which one? The last one?
The one that was just playing, yeah.
Love you the right way. Yeah, I got you, brother. I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you. That's one of my Afro beats, Afro swag. All right, brother. Y'all hold it down, man. I'm gonna see you. Be good, brothers. Thanks.
All right, man. Take it easy.
All right, brother.
Peace.